Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube, and it's time, Sam. Our usual Thursday time slot here, 10:30 a.m., but we're going through the NFC, every free agent move, basically. We're reviewing all of the NFC teams, what they've done, where they stand now, what still needs to be done, and maybe even how this affects draft strategy for every team in the NFC. We did the AFC yesterday, so go check that out if you have not already. We're going team by team in the NFC. How you doing, Sam?
Doing well. How about you, Steven?
Doing great. I see you're the first comments in the chat, so welcome. Good job.
Thank you.
Good job being first to market there in the chat. Tell your friends we're live. Get them over here. Going through the NFC. It's been a long week of free agency here.
A long week. I mean, look, it only started yesterday. I don't know what you're talking about.
It did just start yesterday.
We're less than 24 hours into free agency.
I was surprised by there was at least more than one person that enjoyed mug talk yesterday. We were breaking down our mugs, and we're back with this. Do you have any other story to tell about your not drinking alcohol mug here?
No, other than it remains still not full of alcohol.
Still coffee.
Although that looks suspiciously like the head of a beer. Unfortunately, it is.
Oh
coffee.
yeah, it is. It's more suspicious. Is this Kay Adams show? You drinking early?
So, I mean, look, we can get into that story if you like. I don't really drink. Not that I don't have any moral issue with it. I just don't particularly like the taste of alcohol. Never have. But when I was doing a weekly segment on the Kay Adams show for PFF, their bit on this was the segment would be called PFF'd Up, right? So the idea was it was like, let's drink and talk some football. It felt like just a fairly thin excuse to just drink on a Friday, right? Which for some people might be great. For me, less so because I don't really drink. So I had to go to the supermarket, buy drink to open a drink and have like a fake beer I would have like a slug of it or whatever. And then I would just get rid of the rest of the beer. It was just like, what am I doing with my life? I'm buying like a 6-pack of Guinness just so I can drink on this Kay Adams show every week and then chuck the rest of it.
At about noon.
Yeah,
right?
On a Friday.
Like noon on a Friday. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, those are the good old days. Kay should have you back on the show.
I mean, yeah.
Maybe you didn't drink enough. All right. We ready to go? NFC. So we did this yesterday. We went team moves that we liked, moves that we didn't like, biggest winner, and then we'll go team by team. We'll make sure every team gets some level of love here. So the best NFC move, Sam. Let's start with that. Best move by a team in the NFC. What do you have?
So I would have taken yours, but I saw you got there first, so I had to go with a different one. I really like DJ Reed to the Lions. Last year, DJ Reed outplayed Sauce Gardner in that Jets defense. He was a really high-end player, and okay, he's getting on in age a little bit, but it's more the kind of process that I love. I think they got a good player, but heading into free agency, you're like looking at this Lions roster and you're saying, where do they need to address? What are the weaknesses? What are the concerns? And like that cornerback room could be a problem. It's, a couple of young guys that they drafted last year, neither of whom, stood up and dominated as a rookie. They can definitely improve, and, you should expect that, but you can definitely envisage a world where those two, if they're your starters, are a weak link this season. So instead the Lions went, well, let's insulate against that. Let's ensure against that as a concern. They go out and get DJ Reed, who should immediately step in as one high quality starter in this secondary, allowing them to kind of platoon the other young guys and say, okay, one of you guys needs to stand up. We don't need both of you. We don't need, everybody. We just need one guy. And even worst case scenario now, assuming he comes back healthy and fine, we saw Amik Robertson could step out and be a capable starter as a number 2 if they need. So absolute worst case scenario now, the Lions are kind of set in that secondary with that one move.
Yeah, love the depth there. And I think, like I was talking about with the Bills yesterday, as my AFC winner, they do what we always talk about, right? Which is fill your needs right now. So you go into the draft clear-headed, right? So you could just don't have to attack needs. That you just draft the best players. And so the Lions having that depth in the secondary, I think helps quite a bit going into the draft. So yeah, I like that move. We'll talk more about the Lions in a bit here. The one that I stole from you is the Joe Thuney trade. If you could grab Joe Thuney for a 4, like the Chicago Bears did, it was the biggest domino for them, I think, in their offensive line overhaul, right? I think Drew Dahlman, Jonah Jackson, also fine additions. They get Dahlman at center for decent money for a center. But Joe Tooney for a 4, even if you're going to have to restructure his contract and he's in his 30s and everything, but guards don't, I don't know. It's kind of hit or miss. I don't see any regression to Joe Tooney's game unless you're going to play him at left tackle. You might have some issues, but as far as left guard goes, he's one of the league's best. And I thought it was just outstanding use of a 4th-round draft pick by the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all subjective, right? But I would say that is the correct answer. Like, that is the best move that an NFC team has made this year, is snagging Joe Tooney for that draft pick with the cash and flexibility to extend him in a way that Kansas City didn't have. Like, it's the perfect level of opportunism, right? It's sort of like Washington snagging Debo because different, salary cap life cycles. They had the money, they had the picks when the 49ers didn't have one of them and needed to shed a contract. Same thing. Kansas City found themselves kind of in a squeeze with that offensive line with only so much money to go around. Chicago needed offensive linemen. Are like, well, we can take that on. Absolutely. Let's go.
So those were our favorite moves in the NFC. How about a most puzzling move? Which one did you question the most from an NFC team?
So again, I think you have the correct answer on this one, but I was struggling to find too many moves that I really thought were questionable. Someone in the chat mentioned that Chicago overpaid for Grady Jarrett. I did think about that, given where he is in his life cycle. He's already 10 years into his career at this point. I think he's a long way off the kind of perfect version, the high end of his career. Maybe I would agree with that. The one I went with, though, was Aaron Banks to Green Bay. Now, it's with the caveat that it's not as egregious as the headline agent Fed contract number that officially went out. Aaron Banks for $77 million, whatever. It's not that bad, right? They only guaranteed the signing bonus of his deal. It's more like identifying Aaron Banks as the guy to come in and fix it. It's like when the Giants signed John Runyon Jr. and it's like, the money's okay, but what are the chances that this time in a year's time, you're going to be looking at this and going, yeah, we're sorted. Like John Runyon fixed it, right? He came in and was the solution. I would kind of ask the same with Aaron Banks. Like, what are the chances that Aaron Banks, like, when the best thing you can say is the contract's easy to get out of, it's better than not being easy to get out of, but I would prefer a guy where you're like, this is just good, period.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. The Aaron Banks trade. I mean the signing, that he was part of the Niners offensive line where we said, hey, Brock Purdy's actually kind of elevating beyond this line and working with okay pass protection, right? Trent Williams is fine. Colton McKivitz developed pretty well. And Banks is, I think, outplayed expectations as a guy that didn't look like a fit for that type of scheme. But for that type of money, it's a big investment for Banks to play left guard. I would say the chat had this, bunch of people in the chat, Javon Kinlaw, another 49er signing somewhere else, going to the Washington Commanders, the 3 years, $45 million. I looked at that contract breakdown. I think they can get out of it pretty easily after year 2, similar to what you're saying, but it's an $18 million cap hit in year 2 for Javon Kinlaw. And he was one of those guys. I thought the way the Jets brought him in last year, 1 year, I think it was like $7 million. I was like, that's good. Yeah, that's good for Kinlaw. And he played at about that level, a guy that really still struggles with pad level. He's about 6'6", still struggles in the run game, gets moved off the ball. I don't trust him as a 3-down player. But when you're talking about on 3rd down as part of a pass rush rotation, good player. I think that's fine. It's an overpay for that money. And I know it's all relative. When you have Jaden Daniels on the rookie contract, you're allowed some of those. And I think we're going to talk plenty about the moves that we like from the Washington Commanders. So it'll come out in the wash, I think, for all the moves that they made. But this one individually was a surprise. And then the other part of it was how quickly this went down, right? We talk about this a lot. When teams make the move within the first couple hours of free agency, that was plan A. This was what they were going for. This isn't, I think a lot of what Carolina did was plan B and C because they were in on Milton Williams. Washington, this was plan A. Go get Javon Kinlaw for the 3 years, $45 million.
Yeah, like Kinlaw is an interesting guy because he's so obviously former 1st-round draft pick, was a disaster in San Francisco. Injuries were a big part of that. Didn't play a lot in those first few years. And then we sort of saw the final year in San Francisco, like he ticked up and it was like, oh, look, all of a sudden, maybe there's a suggestion that he could get clear of these injuries, suddenly start to put together a run of healthy play. And you're at least seeing flashes of that pass rushing ability. So the Jets signed him and it's like for like a veteran minimum, kick the tires kind of deal, you're like that. I kind of like that for Kinlaw. But now we're a year removed from that. He played the most he's ever played last year. Didn't get any better as a pass rushing. It's not like we got a year clear of the injuries and suddenly the Jets brought him in for that, like, let's have a look, cheap deal. And he really impressed, like he really kicked on. And you're saying, okay, this guy's in the ascendancy. Like it's a good time to buy. He didn't get any better last year. And in fact, if anything, ticked worse a little bit as a pass rusher. Certainly didn't suggest that there is much more in the tank from what we saw. And yet the price tag went way up. So I think it's an overpay for Kinlaw, who may be a solid rotational body as a situational pass rusher. But I mean, that's pretty rich money for that role.
In both places where Kinlaw signed after San Francisco, there were 49ers ties, right? He goes to Robert Saleh with the Jets last year, now Adam Peters in Washington. So there are ties. So it could be, hey, they love him in the locker room. They know what they're getting, whatever it might be. Those moves always happen, but it doesn't feel like a production-based type of signing. We're going to get into our biggest NFC winners. So we're going to probably keep talking about Washington here, Sam. So I'll let you kick this off. The team that you think did the best job in the NFC.
Yeah, I will go with Washington. Even with the Kinlaw signing that I think is an overpay or is not a move that I would have made. The two biggest things they've done are the trades, right? I'm going to give them credit for the Debo thing in free agency. They trade for Debo Samuel. They snag him for a low draft pick who, I mean, look, it's debatable how much Debo has left in the tank, what he can get back to, like how much of injuries affected him. But theoretically, if you get anything like the best version of Debo Samuel, and it's an absolute game changer. If you only get like a useful number 2, number 3 wide receiver out of Debo Samuel, it's an upgrade over what they already had. So from that standpoint, I think it's great business. It's a good use of salary cap space. And then Laramie Tunsil as well. Look, the stuff that the Texans reporters, Texans people are saying probably is not without merit, like the fact that this guy might not be the greatest locker room influence in the world. He is, however, a massive upgrade on the offensive line for a team who, like, that offensive line had the potential to undermine this team, this offense, the development of Jaden Daniels. You have to assume that with all the kind of culture setting, with Jaden Daniels being there entrenched for a year now, they have the people that can kind of the leadership, the kind of cultural authority to be able to bring in a guy like Laramie Tunsil and handle whatever that entails. But from a purely on the field perspective, like, it's a massive upgrade for them. It didn't cost them that much, like a second, a third, a seventh, and then they swapped the fourth. So I think that's perfectly reasonable for a team like Washington. Re-signing a few people. Bobby Wagner remains there again, like just another series of one-year deals for Bobby. And then, like little bits and pieces. So Jonathan Jones is a good addition for them at corner. So I really like the two sort of significant veteran moves they made, and then just tinkering around the edges.
Yeah, I mean, it's aggressive, man. I mean, that was, if you look at Adam Peters in Washington now in 2 years, it's aggressive trades and then a whole bunch of complimentary contracts. I mean, it's Bobby Wagner, who you mentioned. I thought a couple sneaky good ones. Jonathan Jones, cornerback from the Patriots, coming in for 1 year. Dietrich Wise coming in for 1 year from New England. Potential starting corner in Jonathan Jones opposite Marshawn Lattimore, with Mike Sanders still likely playing in the slot there. And then Dietrich Wise as part of the defensive line rotation. Obviously, you mentioned the big ones. It's love watching how new GMs operate, right? When they come from good organizations and you try to see, okay, how are they going to put their stamp on this team? And the Adam Peters era so far, a year and a half into this thing, it's essentially complementary players and then trading picks for players with aggressive moves. And it might not just be his philosophy as much as this is where Washington is with the rookie contract. We have Jaden Daniels. We're going to trade multiple picks for Marshawn Lattimore, multiple picks for Laramie Tunsil, and flipping a 5 for Debo Samuel. So it's not quite what the Rams were doing with Les Snead, because they were giving up ones for bona fide stars over and over again. This is kind of second tier stars in the NFL. Debo, kind of a reclamation project. Laramie Tunsil, one of the best left tackles, but it's a left tackle. And Lattimore, again, kind of a reclamation type of project. So it's not a 1 for Jalen Ramsey or 2 1s for Jalen Ramsey, but it is similar where they're valuing, hey, the second, third, fourth round and fifth round in Debo's case, we want the players rather than the mystery box at the point of where our team is. So I think it's just been fun to watch the Commanders just do business. And I don't know if it comes back to bite 2-3 years from now, because usually when you give up that many draft picks, it's difficult to be good 2 or 3 years from now. And that's going to be the challenge, I think, for Washington here.
I feel like roster construction is kind of like, diet advice. Number one, nobody actually knows what the truth is, right? Which is you can find a million different advices, the Atkins diet, the carnivore diet, like everything, right? No matter what you're into, there's somebody out there advocating this is the healthiest thing you can do. And the chances are it's impossible to actually navigate what the real truth is. But number two, I think any one of these things is probably okay for a short period of time. And the problem occurs only when you do it like exclusively. So again, like that, the best advice is probably just every little bit in moderation. Like if you're doing occasional trades for a veteran where you can just, snag an opportunistic addition, cool. Occasional years where you trade for a specific player in the draft because, this guy, we've got to have him or whatever. Like any one of those things that's not optimal normally is probably okay if you do it one time as an exception. The only issue is, I think, if you end up that you make that the strategy, right? So if Washington decided for the next few years we're going to start trading all of our picks for like veteran additions, that's an issue. If you do it 1 year and you bring in a Debo, you bring in a Laramie Tunsil, and then that's it, right? We just needed 2 significant upgrades because they came across our desk. But now we're going back to building in the draft. We're going back to the usual way of things. Like, I think every one of these like avenues of building a team in moderation is probably the correct strategy, which again is like, when you think, how does Howie do it? It's that, right? Like he doesn't do any one thing to an exclusive crazy degree. He just, every little one of these things he tends to do when it pops up as an opportunity, as opposed to, no, we only approach this way. Like just the lack of dogmatic obsession, I think, is probably why Howie is one of the best GMs in the game.
It's you remain a metaphorical genius, Sam, comparing roster building to diet advice.
Yeah.
If I could just piggyback on that really quick, I will say you pull, when it comes to the diet advice, I think you find the common threads across all the diet advice, and most of them land at protein and vegetables. Most of them lands there. Eat more protein, eat more veggies. And to me, that's the draft. That's the draft in this equation. The foundation for your diet should probably be lean protein and vegetables. The foundation for your team should probably be the draft. However, you can have cheat days where you trade for Laramie Tunsil. Cheat days are allowed. Laramie Tunsil can be, carbo loading on a weekend, but you certainly can't keep that up and keep doing it. So stick with your protein and veggies and draft in volume over time. I think we've solved this.
Can I just say, I cannot believe that this is one of the days where we do not have an Orgain ad read, because this would have been the greatest segue of all time into an Orgain protein ad read. Get your 30 grams of protein. We could have sent that into the awards people, right? Yeah. You think we're not podcast awards worthy? Look at this. Look at this ad read.
It would have been unbelievable. Send a bill to Orgain because we just gave them. No, we take care of our sponsors. I still have one more. I'm gonna work out and drink it today. Actually, can't wait. Oh, the chocolate. It's gonna be great. Anyway, people are asking about the Vikings. We'll talk about the Vikings, but it's like it's a life cycle thing. Like Kwesi didn't sit down, I don't think, in his interview a couple of years ago and say, "Here's the deal. I don't believe in the draft. I'm not even good at drafting. I'm gonna miss," because everybody complains about him in the draft. It's like when you have a 3-year sample and you miss on a couple first, like everybody has that. So that's where they are right now. And he didn't sit down and be like, look, I'm just going to punt on draft picks because I don't think it's valuable. I'm going to sign all the free agents. But where they are in their life cycle, when you have a rookie contract quarterback, you're going to be more aggressive. If Kwesi's there for another 5 years and JJ McCarthy's the guy, and in 5 years from now, he's making $50 million a year, guess what? He's not going to draft 4 times a year. He's going to draft 12 times probably to balance that out. So it depends on where you are with your roster and in what you have available when it comes to finances and the ability to spend.
But also remember, like, winning free agency is not simply who spends the most money on the most volume of players. I mean, the Vikings are winning free agency in pure like monetary terms, but I mean, go and track how often that correlates to a good team the next year. It might work, but it's not automatic that if you just signed the most high price and high ranked free agents, you are the best free agent team.
All right, so that was your favorite teams, Washington. That's our Commanders breakdown. I overall really enjoy what they've done. I would not put it. I don't want to brush past the fact that they bring back Zach Ertz for a year. You mentioned Bobby Wagner, Dietrich Wise, Jonathan Jones, all for 1-year deals. They did a bunch of this last year where they filled out their roster with 1- and 2-year contracts, and now they get to go into the draft not completely need free, but with fewer needs, or at least acute needs. They could draft for the future. And then the trickle down of the Laramie Tunsil move, just to reiterate this really quick, left tackles are not available in the NFL. Pass blocking left tackles are not available. And Brandon Coleman, I think, struggled as a rookie. He had some flashes, good for a third-round rookie, but you don't want to bank on him as your future left tackle. You could kick him into guard, and I think you've solved maybe 2 offensive line positions with the one Laramie Tunsil move there. So I think that's the residual effect there. And then the upside of Debo in this system with Jaden Daniels, the run threat, with Terry McLaurin as the one, I think is spectacular. So there's a lot to like about what Washington's done. So I agree with you that they're one of the best teams. So you guys giving cooking advice in the chat here?
It's Walt's specialty.
Sockeye salmon?
Football takes, not so much. Grilling.
No. I mean, maybe he's good at cooking takes. All right, my favorite NFC team, my NFC winner is the Los Angeles Rams, and it's for, I mean, different reasons, right? It's not a high volume deal from the Rams, but they're one of the teams they've had their protein and veggies, man. They've built their foundation through the draft, which I think allowed them to go be the team that signs Davante Adams for 2 years, $46 million. And it's a released Davante Adams. It's not going to work against their, future comp pick allocation or anything. So I think that's also good. And then the one kind of big signing that they make is Poona Ford. And for me, when I look through the free agent lists, I look at the top, but I generally look at where the free agents that are ranked, between 20 and 50. And I can usually pick out 8 or 10 of those guys that are of high value. Morgan Moses and the other guys, right? Poona Ford's one of those guys, right? With the defensive tackle money flying around like crazy. Milton Williams, Javon Kinlaw, Turk Wharton, all these guys. And Poona Ford is just consistently good. He's one of my guys. One of my, hey, I want this guy on my team every year type of guys. I should make my whole team. That'd be an off-season task here, Sam. Who are the guys you just want on your team every year? Who do we say the most? We need like a tracker of the names that we say guys we like the most. Poona Ford's on that list for me. So they add him on the defensive line, essentially replaces Bobby Brown III, who left to go to Carolina. So Poona Ford sitting next to Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk. I think it's an upgrade on the defensive line for them. And then I know you like the move of Alaric Jackson, re-signing him to play left tackle. So once again, when we're mock drafting for the Rams, we're not saying, boom, starter here. Maybe they need a starting corner or at least some competition at corner, but they don't have a ton of glaring needs heading into the draft. And I like some of these moves that they made.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the Rams have done really good work. I really like the gamble. I really like the addition of Davante Adams. I think that's a perfect landing spot for him, both in terms of not needing to be the number one, but also being prepared with Matthew Stafford, a quarterback that is willing to give him those chances, like stylistically a little bit like Aaron Rodgers in terms of the types of passes he'll throw to Davante Adams. So I think it's a great fit for them.
Anything else on the Rams? Jimmy Garoppolo comes back as the backup. Tutu Atwell comes back for 1 year, $10 million. Of course, they're going to move on from Cooper Kupp. And I think, that was just time. I know the rest of the league is yearning for Cooper Kupp right now, but there's a reason why the Rams are moving on. They did upgrade, I think, with Davante Adams coming in at this point in their careers, the way Davante's looked and the way Cooper Kupp appears to have lost a step a little bit. I saw the NFL. Sometimes it's tough to do this, Sam, unless you have the A/B analysis. I saw the NFL put out, hey, this is the Cooper Kupp's Super Bowl from a couple years ago when he was uncoverable. And it is kind of jarring when you see how quick, how sneaky fast Cooper Kupp was then. But really the quickness, the explosion that he had, and his ability to get open versus what he is right now. And I do believe it's a factor. Like, he's lost a step or two in a couple years. Still think he's savvy, knows how to get open, runs routes well, but you lost a little bit of that explosiveness that he had a few years ago because he was uncoverable in that 2021 season.
Yeah, Arif Hassan, though, was posting, like, it is funny, the narrative on Cooper Kupp. When you look at his career as a whole, I mean, he had that one season where he won the Triple Crown, like had one of the greatest wide receiver seasons of all time, right? Like up there with literally the best ever. But only 2 other seasons where, even including the playoffs, he topped 1,000 yards. Like his career otherwise, it's actually not like there's not that much to it. It's one staggeringly insane season. And then outside of that, he's been more of a complementary player as opposed to like a true dominant force. And yet, we treat this as like Cooper Kupp, the player that he used to be. And it's like, well, he was that for 1 year, and he was pretty good for another 2 years. But like, it's just a weird career given the kind of discussion around Cooper Kupp.
No, I get it. I mean, you're kind of chasing that upside. I'll still compare him to Adam Thielen. And, Thielen's ability, I mean, Thielen may have had a better, more extended career than Kupp, if you want to be honest about it. Kupp's peak was outstanding, but that's what you're trying to get. We'll talk about Kupp whenever he does sign somewhere where every fan base seems to really want him. So either way, I like what the Rams have done, and so that's our Rams analysis for the day. We're going to go team by team now through the rest of the league, the NFC at least. NFC East, Giants. By the way, if you're an AFC fan, yesterday's show, we went through the AFC. Don't leave or anything, but make sure that you check out yesterday's show. We went team by team in the AFC. So let's go through the NFC East. New York Giants. They bring in Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland in the secondary. Those are the 2 big ones for the Giants here. Adebo, 3 years, $54 million. Javon Holland, 3 years, $45+ million. So a corner and maybe the top safety on the market in Javon Holland. Those are the big ones. Bring back Darius Slay, 3 years, $36 million. And, I know you liked him quite a bit as that second tier of receiver in free agency. The Giants have had him for a few years. He'll come in, still compete for that 2/3 role, vertical threat next to Malik Neighbors. So those are all pretty good moves for the Giants. Of course, the big one is they're waiting on Aaron Rodgers, Sam. So we'll see what goes down with that. Aaron Rodgers still deciding between the Giants and the Steelers. And of course, that'll determine a lot of what the Giants look like for next year.
Are they also giving him space the way the Pittsburgh Steelers reportedly are, or the Giants more desperate and they're like sending him texts every couple hours like, hey, Aaron, you think any thoughts? They were reportedly telling him that he'd hit it off great, but he would vibe with Malik Neighbors. Are they? And so, number one, are they a lot less willing to give him space than the Steelers? Like, are they just sending him constant texts? Number two, is that a good or a bad thing for Aaron Rodgers? Like, does he respond well to desperation? Like, if he gets 15 texts a day from the Giants being like, hey, Aaron, is he like, yeah, I like that. I like the neediness, No,
I think Aaron goes, I would assume Aaron goes technology dark for like 15 hours a day.
You think he's just like putting the phone in a drawer and coming back to it?
Yeah. I think he's anti-technology for about half of his awake time. So he'll come back to, right? Isn't that like a pretty good guess? Or do you think he's the other way?
Because where
he's like overly checking his name.
No, because the phone is your window through to your own research, right? How are you supposed to do your own research if it's not by your phone scouring the internet?
On your desktop. Use your desktop.
No, he's not a desktop man.
When he's been ignoring his family for 20 years. He puts his phone aside.
They just know not to contact him now.
I don't even know. I'm so sick of talking about it. Honestly, if you're the Giants too, like, I don't even know if that's the play. I think I get it for the Steelers. I get Aaron Rodgers for the Vikings. Like, I could talk myself into him for the Vikings. I kind of get it for the Steelers. I think for the Giants, you don't want this. You want
It's a bridge,
hope
though, for the Giants.
because you want to draft. You have to draft a guy this year.
Yeah.
You can't sit there and be like, oh, we're Aaron Rodgers' team for the next 2 years. We're just going to build around him and make a run. You have to have a vision for the future, and so that's going to be another factor as well.
But you don't want to be done by October, right? Like if you draft Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward or whatever, like whoever you're taking at the top of the draft, you don't want to be like 1-3 by the time, you throw these guys in week one. It's still a catastrophe. You're already buried by the time October starts. Everyone's getting fired. Now it's just 3 months of waiting until, we clean house. They want Rodgers for a bridge. Like we'll play Rodgers for the first however long, we'll get the young guy used to the New York media market. And then by the time we need to, let's turn the keys over to him and we're ready to go.
Rodgers doesn't want that though. Like this is why he shouldn't, like if he goes to the Giants and they can be like, look, Aaron, we're gonna draft Shedeur at 3, or we're gonna draft Will Howard in the 2nd, and you're gonna mentor him. He's not going there. He's going to Pittsburgh where he's gonna be the guy.
Well, maybe
he's like,
that's not like
Aaron, I could win 9 games in my sleep. You're gonna take us to 12. Like,
right, but that doesn't affect the Giants wanting him. I mean, that's just like he has a better offer on the table if that's how it works. Like they don't care that that's not what he wants. That's what they need.
I'm just saying they have to be realistic and think he's not going to just get out of it. Just be like, we're done with you.
Right, but if they're drafting somebody, it doesn't matter. Like either they get Rodgers as the bridge or they don't get Rodgers as the bridge. Either way, they're drafting the quarterback, so it's kind of irrelevant.
All right, I'm tired of this conversation. I like what the Giants have done outside of figured out quarterback, and I think got to draft somebody. I don't know if it's at 3. I don't know if I'm sold at Shedeur at 3 for them. If the Browns are actually going to take him, I'm not sure if that's the move necessarily, but got to draft somebody, get him in the building. I think they've done a nice job. Like the secondary does look improved with the Debo there. If he's healthy, Javon Holland, I think has been really good across multiple schemes. And so I like what they've done there at least.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think those moves in the secondary are very good. There was somebody in the chat, by the way, saying that I'm the only person out there that still thinks Shedeur is an option at 3. I mean, again, he has not moved on the consensus board yet from 4. All this talk of him slipping and putting teams off, and he's going to be available late in the first round. Like it's not being reflected on big board changes yet. People are not dropping him.
Let's repeat again. There's so much information out there. There's so many mock drafts out there. So you'll see some people diverging and saying, look, what happened after the combine, Sam? Some people went and said, Shedeur's dropping. He had a couple bad interviews. Those are the reports. He's going to drop later in the first round. Who knows how far he goes. Then there's other people putting QBs at 1, 2, and 3 in their mock draft.
Right.
Where it goes Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, 1, 2, 3 to the Titans, Browns, and Giants. So it's not like there's this consensus, like legitimate consensus coming out of the combine that Shedeur's going mid-first or late first. It's going both ways. There's some people saying Jackson Dart at 3. There's some people saying Shedeur at 21, right? Pittsburgh could get him at 21. Who knows? So there's it's going both ways here.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it won't happen, or it definitely will happen rather, but it's not. It's still a pretty healthy chance. Like he's still the second most popular pick for the Giants at number 3 overall in the PFF mock draft. Sam, it's a healthy chunk of people that think he's still available and an option at that spot. So it's not just me.
To answer Jeremy Schultz in the chat, the public board for PFF, I don't think is live right now. It says public, but it's really based off their own board. So Shedeur goes late in the PFF sims because it's still based off the PFF board where he's very low. That's my interpretation of my understanding of their simulator at the moment. The actual consensus board, NFL mock draft database.com, has Shedeur still pretty high because some people have lowered on him. Some people have not. So that's where we are on Shedeur Sanders. Who's next? Dallas Cowboys, Sam. Now, everybody says the Cowboys don't make their splash moves. I think the best move Dallas made, Osa Odighizuwa, locking him up, probably would have been right there below Milton Williams as far as coveted pass rushers go. 4 years, $80 million for Osa Odighizuwa. Looks like a decent steal for Odighizuwa at that price relative to the rest of the market. Not a lot of other big moves here for the Cowboys. Kevontae Turpin comes back for 3 years, $18 million. Former first-round edge, Peyton Turner. Got to call him former first-rounder. Peyton Turner, 1 year, $3 million. Javonte Williams, the running back, 1 year, $3 million. Solomon Thomas, former first-rounder, 2 years, $8 million. They're just stacking up first-rounders here. Former first-rounder Kenneth Murray. Actually, now that I'm reading this, they traded for him. They also traded for former first-rounder Kaiir Elam. So that is 4 former first-rounders coming in to the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah. The strategy is to pay nothing for a series of former first-rounders and hope that they pan out and make dramatic inroads on this team. I mean, this move is there. This offseason so far has basically been lock up Odigizua before the market to a really good deal value-wise. I mean, Odigizua relative to Milton Williams is on a lot less money. And okay, Milton Williams has been better than Odigizua, but like those were the sort of 2 star defensive tackles available in free agency, and Dallas locked them up before for a lot less money. Kevontae Turbin is a really nice move to re-sign him. The best kick returner in the NFL these days, like a special teams dynamo and a kind of gimmick player on offense. Really nice. And then it's just a series of very low price moves on former first round picks.
Yeah, I mean, I'm torn on what Dallas is doing. I think the conversation's very similar to the Bengals conversation, where the biggest issue is letting guys that you know you're going to want to re-sign, just letting it get out of hand, letting the price get out of hand. It's also interesting. You hear Jerry Jones talk all the time, like, "Oh, we have a salary cap." It's like, yeah, everybody has a salary cap. Everybody does business differently than you. But I also don't think that the way they do business is that much different than, say, the Packers, who for history have just been, nope, we draft and develop, we re-sign our own, and we rarely go into free agency. And we'll talk about the Packers in a bit. They dabbled in free agency twice this year. Last year, once or twice, right? That's how they do it. But so that's like it's like they're a couple players away from just being the Packers right now, who get complimented for building through the draft and only caring about their own. And Dallas has overall done a very good job drafting for the last 8 to 10 years and building a foundation on this team. But there's got to be, to me, there still has to be a little bit more aggressiveness. I saw the chat and I saw the story, since 2015 was the last free agent they paid more than $6 million a year was Greg Hardy. They don't have the diversified portfolio, like you said a little while ago, using all the tools, rolling all the diet plans into one and pulling from here and there and pulling the right levers. Their one lever is draft and develop, and the other levers are not being pulled.
You know what they are?
What are they?
They're vegans, right? It's like theoretically, it's all good, right? We're trying to be healthy here, but you're just missing out on some red meat protein.
Carnivores. They're carnivores.
No, the other way. They're vegans.
No.
They're like, this is the way you're supposed to do this. We're trying to be healthy. We're trying to be good. I've seen this in a book. This is the healthy way to live in harmony with nature. Like, this is the right thing to do. It's like, but sometimes you just need a damn steak, right? You're missing out on some pure red meat protein. And that's the issue. Dallas just needs every now and again to take the salad that they're eating, which is all good and healthy and fine, and just add a porterhouse to it, right? That's the problem here.
I would almost flip it because I don't think what they're doing is healthy over time. I don't think a vegan's healthy over time.
Well, it's not, but that's the point.
But they're drafted. But the draft is healthy over time. You can get there if you just draft. You can get there. Like, there's a world where you can get there.
Who's done that?
Just draft and develop. The Packers
historically, right? But then they go out there and they augment by getting a Xavier McKinney or whatever. You can't, like, nobody is good enough to just consistently draft year over year over year and only build through the draft anymore. That's why I'm saying it has to be like every single strategy in moderation, because no one is good enough to do that. You can do it for a while. Like, if you hit on a couple of drafts where you nail like almost every pick, it completely changes your entire franchise, right? And it can propel you forward. But if you then like start huffing your own farts and think we can do this every year, all we need to do is be drafting better than everybody else, then that's when you run aground, right? Because you think we can just outdraft everybody else, and then you stop hitting on all those drafts and you crap, like, it just doesn't work. You crap out. You have to like supplement it with other things.
Just gonna let you cook. Dallas, mix in a steak. Next. Mix in a steak, Cowboys. Let's go Philadelphia Eagles. Did they just the chat says they just added Josh Uche? Is that correct?
It did, yeah, this morning.
So here's what's funny about that. I'm a Josh Uche fan. Always add Josh Uche. Always add Josh Uche too, with Poona Ford and Will Fuller and John Ross and my guys. He did nothing for Kansas City. And it wasn't like Kansas City couldn't use a little more juice off the edge or another rotational body. He did almost nothing for Kansas City. So it's a fine buy low. The Eagles also re-signed Zach Bond, 3 years, $51 million. They extended Saquon Barkley, and then a whole bunch of smaller signings. The trade of CJ Gardner-Johnson, probably the other most significant move. Trading him, bringing in Kenyon Green, former first-round guard, to see if they can get him as a reclamation project. At the time, again, I'm a big fan of buy low on third and fourth year offensive linemen, so I like that as a strategy, especially if CJ Gardner-Johnson wasn't necessarily going to be a part of the future there, or they couldn't pay him. They also traded Kenny Pickett for Dorian Thompson-Robinson. They picked up a couple extra draft picks in those deals here.
Yeah, and they have a ton of draft picks over the next couple of years. I think that's their strategy, right? Is there, again, theoretically, let's position ourselves to draft 1 million times, which does not necessarily mean that they're going to draft 1 million times. You just set yourself up with the flexibility to go and use those picks, if something comes along. Again, just be in a position to capitalize on every little bit of this. It's an interesting offseason because I think theirs is one where you have to look at the net, right? You have to start looking at the departures as well as the additions. So they had a ton of guys hitting free agency this year. They had Josh Sweat, they had Milton Williams, they had Zach Bond. There was a lot of their defense. The defense just murdered the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. A huge portion of that was hitting free agency at the same time. And it was always like, who are they going to try and retain? Who are they going to keep? Who are they going to go? The thought, I think, before free agency is Zach Bond is probably going to be gone because that's not where they tend to lock up their money. They might try and bring back one of Williams or Josh Sweat, unlikely to keep both of them. Actually, Bond was the guy they ended up keeping. They locked up Zach Bond to a big contract off that incredible year that he had, and they let the defensive lineman hit free agency. So that itself is interesting. They then trade away CJ Gardner-Johnson. So that's 3 significant parts of that defense departing this offseason. They give Saquon Barkley this massive extension off the back of his amazing season. And then the Josh Uche move is interesting because that's a classic Howie move, right? Like, let's bring in a low price, low risk, but potentially really useful situational pass rusher. Like Josh Uche could easily become, their Brandon Graham from last year, their Bryce Huff idea, right? The guy that's going to play 400 snaps, 300 of which are designated pass rushing snaps, and just be part of that rotation.
Yeah, I think you could compare this season a little bit. They win the Super Bowl in 2017. I think they did more of a go for it move in 18 and into 19, and then they reset. Then they did they kind of waited a little bit before the reset. And this isn't a roster reset, but they've got the Super Bowl in the bank right now. They didn't go nuts to just re-sign their own. But as you mentioned, so they have 8 picks. I believe it is 8 picks this year. They're all in the first 5 rounds. They have 4 fifth rounders. So they have 8 picks, which it's only one more than 7, the allotted, but they're all in the first 5 rounds. So that's a pretty good, a good amount of draft capital there. And then I think with Milton Williams going out the door, Josh Sweat going out the door, they're going to get a whole bunch of comp picks coming in because they haven't done a whole bunch. The next 2 years, the Eagles have their big nucleus is still locked up. They just rejigged their secondary with the 2 corners last year. You still have the 2 receivers. You have your quarterback. You have Saquon. The offensive line, I think, is in still pretty good shape with Mailata and Juergens, and they've got pieces there. But the next couple of years are going to be this youth movement in Philadelphia with all these extra picks to build around the nucleus. And it's just where they are in their life cycle. They got their Super Bowl, not in this like crazy go for it move, but they've drafted it and developed Milton Williams and Josh Sweat and those types of players, and they're going to get the comp picks for those guys. In the next 2 years, they're going to pick probably 18 to 20 times and bring back a whole bunch of volume in the draft. So always like what the Eagles are doing, and it's different, right? When you talked about how do they pull all these levers, how do they use all these different tools? I loved the couple of years that they were wheeling and dealing with first rounders, and they just kept flipping first rounders into better first rounders and more picks. And that set them up for this level of success. That's how you get Jalen Carter. That's how you get A.J. Brown. Like, they did that for a few years. Now I think it's less about the first round picks and it's about the volume drafting over these next couple of years to build around this nucleus that's getting expensive. It's an expensive nucleus for the Eagles, so they're going to get cheaper and younger over these next 2 years.
Yeah. And they've already, I mean, they got, I don't want to say they got lucky last year, but last year's draft class really helped them do that. Bringing in Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, those two guys alone like massively aided the ability to get younger and cheaper, because now you can get rid of Darius Slay, another offseason departure. You can get rid of James Bradbury. Like, you can move on from these older, expensive veterans, get wildly cheaper, and looks like they may have upgraded with both those moves as well, given given the standard of those guys right now, not at their peaks, but like right now, they've gotten better and cheaper at two different spots just with those picks. A guy like Jalix Hunt looks like he's going to do the same thing for the defensive line, like allow them to move on from a guy like Josh Sweat. So yeah, I think last year's draft class already moved them in that direction. If they're able to have another half decent one this year, and that doesn't even mean strike rate, like they can maintain that, or they can have like not a particularly good strike rate, but if they hit enough volume wise, that's why the drafting and volume is important. Like, they can have an average draft strike rate wise, but if they hit on enough volume wise, it's going to enable them to sort of keep this turnover and churn and keep getting better. So the Eagles, I think, are the perfect example right now of that diet plan, everything in moderation. Like, just keep picking up like a healthy, balanced diet. That's what this roster construction is.
Just gonna stick with the analogy the entire time. What are we're going to the NFC North. What kind of diet? We're just comparing everybody's free agency haul to diets, Sam. So Chicago Bears are up next. What does their food intake look like?
Well, I guess if Dallas was, a vegan who just needed a steak, then the Bears is close to the carnivore diet. It's like the
Vikings
draft
went to
hasn't happened yet.
The Vikings went to Fogo. They went all you can eat steak buffet, steak, lamb chops. It's fillets and lamb chops like we like to get at Fogo when we go there, Sam. Right. So save that for the Vikings.
Okay, well, so the Vikings are Fogo. Well, then the Bears is just like the Bears is a trip to the steakhouse.
Yeah.
So it's like it was largely protein, largely meat, largely reasonably high priced. But there's vegetable options, right? Like, there's sides. The sides rock up to the table at a steakhouse. So it's meat based, but it's still reasonably solid.
So Bears, obviously, they reshaped their offensive line. Joe Thuney, the trade, bringing him in at left guard. I already mentioned that as my favorite move for any NFC team. Drew Dahlman, 3 years, $42 million to play center. And they traded for Jonah Jackson, former Lion, former Ram. So the interior of the offensive line has been reshaped. You still have Braxton Jones, who's been a dependable left tackle. Darnell Wright progressing at right tackle. So it's looking like a much better offensive line. And the Bears also did work on the defensive line. Dayo Odeyingbo for 3 years, $48 million. And then Grady Jarrett for 3 years, $43.5 million, coming off of his release from the Atlanta Falcons. As Ryan Poles has reshaped this roster, we've said a bunch. They almost did it the opposite of the Lions. And ironically, Ben Johnson's coming in from the Lions. The Lions did it inside out. I think the Bears almost did it outside in, where you got guys like DJ Moore at receiver. You spent his first 2 draft picks were on in the secondary, Kyler Gordon, Jawan Brisker. So they went on the perimeter a lot more. They spent a ton of money at linebacker, but now they're finally, these last 2 years, starting to invest properly in the trenches with Montez Sweat, a few draft picks at defensive tackle, these 2 defensive tackle signings, and all the offensive line moves. This was like the next piece, I think, for the Bears in their whole team building effort.
Yeah, I mean, so I really like what they've done in the offensive line, obviously. I think that Ben Johnson understands the power that Detroit offensive line has had for his offense. the last few years and wants no part of discovering if it still functions with a subpar offensive line. So they are going hard to rebuild that group, make sure it's in a good space, which gives them options. Number one, it means they can talk themselves into like an Ashton Genty at the top of the draft, and for it to make sense, right? Like, let's put the situation in place so that Genty can actually come in and make an impact, as opposed to let's have a bad situation and hope that he fixes it. So that's good. Number two, it means that Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams can just go to work, right? Now we know the offensive line's in a solid spot. Now let's see what those two can do and work together. My question for you is, I like the offensive side. What do you make of the defensive line additions? Because, Grady Jarrett at his age, 10 years into his career, with the sort of quote unquote decline that he's in at the moment, is that a permanent thing, or is he just coming off a couple of not great years? And then that kind of money for Odeyingbo, those to me seem less encouraging, less optimistic, less overtly good than the offensive ones. And by the way, just to answer people in the chat, we didn't skip Washington. We did Washington right at the start, where we talked about our favorite hits. So we go back to the start of this, or when we do the timestamps in the YouTube, you'll see Washington at the start.
Yeah, we haven't even, and we're not even going in like alphabetical order or anything. So we liked the Commanders so much, we started them with the NFC East because they were one of our favorites. I think for me, I think the entire defensive tackle market is overrated. And I know that's just where the market is, but I think a lot of those players have been overpaid. So there's not a lot of defensive tackle moves. Even Milton Williams, like, is he going to actually be worth $26 million a year? That's going to be tough to do. It's tough for me to say, yeah, you're getting proper bang for your buck, but it's just where the money is right now at defensive tackle. So I don't think you're going to look at too many of those deals and say, oh yeah, you got a great value. When we talk about the Lions, 1 year for Levi Onwuzurike, who has injury concerns, right? Has one healthy year in 4.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to look like good value if he stays healthy, but it's tough. Grady Jarrett at this point in his career, coming off of his essentially a pretty steady decline over the last 3 years. And Odeyingbo, I think, is probably a little overrated he's a movable guy, 6'6", 285. He can play on the edge a little bit, create some mismatches. He's a good low-end starter for me and rotational type piece. So yeah, that's a lot of money for those types. And I already don't love what they have there. I think, Gervon Dexter did a nice job developing last year. I still don't have a lot of faith in him in the run game. So throwing bodies at it is fine, but yeah, I think there's some overpaying there for those guys. And I think there's more work to do. How many times have I said more work to do for these teams? Like, if they have another explosive edge, that's why I think defensive line's in play for them at 10. If the James Pierces and Mike Greens of the world, I would like to add one of those guys, explosive edge rusher, to the mix here for the Bears. And I think they're looking a lot better.
I think, yeah, you're right. It's worth sort of making the point of, this is just where the market has gone at this stage. Like, Grady Jarrett's $15 million a year feels really rich, but that's 5% of today's cap, right? And that cap's going to be going up, maybe 10% year on year. So it's not a huge amount. Even Milton Williams, the deal that he signed, it still only makes him the third highest paid defensive tackle in the game, right? He didn't break the Christian Wilkins mark from a year ago. Was that a year ago? Last year?
Yeah.
Like, Christian Wilkins, I think, is probably a better player than Milton Williams, and the market has reflected that as well. Like, even where Milton Williams was kind of the jewel of this offseason, he didn't break the Christian Wilkins average per year. And those two guys are both behind Chris Jones, who's obviously a better player than either guy. So even Milton Williams' number this year is 9% of the salary cap. Like, it's expensive, but it's not crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you got to overpay for defensive tackles. And I believe, I will continue to reiterate this, I believe it's a scarcity thing, not this is what the NFL believes in, interior pressure over edge pressure. It's a scarcity thing. There's just, the 2019 draft class spoiled us with Jeffrey Simmons, Ed Oliver, Christian Wilkins, Dexter Lawrence, those guys. Not many of those guys exist. And so the players who look like just good rotational players are making 10, 15, up to $20 million. That's just where we are. We'll talk about these guys with the Panthers in a few minutes here as well. So look, overall, I think I like what the potential looks like for the Bears. It's not just pass protection from the offensive line. Dahlman's a good run blocker. Tooney's just one of the best guards in the league. I think they're going to be able to run the ball more effectively as well. So I think it's all trending in the right direction for the Chicago Bears.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go Green Bay Packers. That's the order. I think the Vikings are the other big story in this division, of course. But Packers make two big signings. It's Aaron Banks, who you mentioned earlier, and Nate Hobbs. So Banks comes over, guard from the 49ers. He's going to come in, step in, play left guard. And Nate Hobbs comes over from the Raiders, where he's had some success playing inside, playing outside. 4 years, $48 million for Nate Hobbs. And that's the gist of it. That's how the Packers roll. Not a lot of moves and a couple big free agent signings for them.
That's how the Packers roll.
How they do it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of split on those two moves. I really like the Nate Hobbs move. I think that's a really decent move. One of my favorites of the offseason, or one of my favorites of the free agent period. I think Hobbs fits for them. He can play inside and outside. I like him better in the slot, but he can play outside if they need him to and they want him to. And he's a good fit for that defensive scheme. So I think Nate Hobbs is a great addition. Aaron Banks, look, he should upgrade the offensive line. I'm just a little bit less keen on the money that they've paid him. And I think, again, the fact that like the part of the sales pitch for Aaron Banks is like, hey, we can get out of that contract pretty easily. We haven't given him that much guaranteed money. That's kind of an indication, I think, that it is an overpay. Like even the people who are saying it's a good move are like, hey, we didn't commit that much money to it, which just doesn't feel like what you would be saying if you thought he was a really, really good upgrade. So, yeah, I mean, those are the two moves. I think it's like a mixed bag, 50-50.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think with Jair Alexander likely out the door, and just they've had some promising young corners over the last couple of years, when Carrington Valentine and just Keyshawn Nixon. I don't know if you want to roll into the season and say, okay, you are our guys, and we're building around you guys in the secondary. So adding Nate Hobbs in there, I think, does make some sense for the Packers. Still could see them taking a first-round corner. Still could see them adding some offensive line depth, but because they have so much flexibility there, Elton Jenkins can come in and maybe be the center going forward, with Banks playing left guard. Last year's first-rounder Jordan Morgan likely stepping into right guard. So it's going to be a different look for this Packers offensive line this year. It'll be interesting to see if they could get a little bit more consistency, because I think they've been pretty good from a pass blocking standpoint. Josh Jacobs had a really nice season, but the line, I think, has been a little hit or miss at times over the last couple of years. So it'll look different in 3 out of those 5 spots up front, probably, for the Packers.
Yeah, they still have a little bit of work and tinkering to do. Like they're in a weird spot where they have quite a lot of options to cover the slot now, like Nate Hobbs, Javon Bullard, the sort of safety slot hybrid. Keyshawn Nixon, I think, is better in the slot as well. Like they've got all these guys who are, I think, better in the slot than they are outside. Somebody is probably going to have to play outside, even more so if they do end up moving on from Jair Alexander and cutting or trading him, which has been a point of discussion for the Packers. So I think corner is still a need for them going forward. And then obviously the other sort of elephant in the room is not that they had that many options to do this, but they haven't gone targeting a number one wide receiver, quote unquote, the way a lot of people think that they should, or the way that Josh Jacobs has basically said that they should. So those 2 spots, like out in the perimeter, I think are still interesting areas for them.
Has there been any breaking news here? No. Keeping up with Twitter here. There it is. We have breaking news. Steelers have signed a quarterback.
Jameis?
Mason Rudolph back to the Steelers.
Yeah.
It's a 2-year, $8 million deal, 4.5 guaranteed. Brooke Pryor via Mike Garofalo. Sorry, Mike. I saw Pony tweeting about he's back, and I was like, what'd the Steelers do? Mason Rudolph is a Pittsburgh Steeler once again. Bring him home, man. Bring him home. I've got no more use for the Packers or Mason Rudolph news. Let's go Minnesota Vikings. Fogo, baby. Will Fries at guard, 5 years, $88 million. Ryan Kelly, 2 years, $18 million to play center. They're just stealing Colts offensive linemen. They're also grabbing, imagine this one, say 3 years ago, if we said, hey, Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave are coming in to the same team, rushing the passer.
Yeah.
Jonathan Allen, 3 years, $60 million. Javon Hargrave, 3 years, $30 million. Isaiah Rodgers to play corner, 2 years, $15 million. They also re-signed Byron Murphy Jr., 3 years, $66 million. Harrison Smith agreed to come back for year 14 or 15 at a little over $10 million a year. The money has been spent by Kwesi and the Vikings.
Yeah. So if Dallas are a vegan in desperate need of a steak, then the Vikings went to Fogo, right? They got nothing but meat, and they not ignored, they deliberately have kind of eschewed the salad bar, right? Like, we're not wasting valuable stomach space on salad at Fogo. We're here for the meat, picanha, lamb chops, filet. Like, that's what we're doing here. So yeah, they've thrown a ton of money at this. And again, I think a little bit like Green Bay, albeit with significantly more volume. It's like a mixed bag, right? I think upgrading the offensive line is significant. It's important for them. I think it was coming based off the way their season ended. It was like a shock to the system that, hey, this interior that you've been hiding for a while actually is a problem. Like, you're going to need to fix that if you want to beat the best teams in the NFL. So Will Fries, Ryan Kelly bringing in 2/5 of a really good offensive line now. Each one of those guys got a little bit of question marks about him, right? Will Fries, it's a sample size thing. We haven't seen that much play of him playing at that level. And then Ryan Kelly's been banged up a lot since he was sort of one of the best centers in the NFL. So there's some risk attached to it, but those are two players that should upgrade that offensive line significantly if they're both playing. The defensive line thing is really interesting to me. Hargrave, I think, should make an immediate impact and be a massive upgrade for them, like the best pass rushing defensive tackle they've had for years. Allen is more of a question mark because, he's not played at his best for a while now. He had that one insane game where he came back from what was literally reported as a season-ending pec injury for him last year, made it back before the regular season, and then had an amazing game against Detroit in the playoffs where he was a huge difference maker there. That was like vintage Jonathan Allen, like back to his best, but only for that one game. Like, wasn't that before that? Wasn't that after that? So I don't know what version of Jonathan Allen they're getting, but if they can get, again, anything like his best play, it's a huge upgrade. But that, 3 years, $60 million for him based off his recent tape is an overpay.
Yeah. I mean, I think I made this point the other day. Neither guy, if you're going to look at PFF run defense grades, which I think are legit to look at, neither guy is good in that area. And I think Minnesota's banking on schematically working around that. They do a good job crowding the box, having the extra man to make a tackle in and around the line of scrimmage. I think they could scheme around that, I think, and that's part of their strategy. I think when you look at Allen's decline in production, though, I mean, he did get hurt. Last year was a small sample size. Like, his PFF pass rush grades, it peaked at 90 in 2021, 81, 77. Last year down to 68. So has there been a decline? Yeah, but I wouldn't even. Last year's a little over half a season worth of data, basically. If he's a high 70s, low 80s pass rusher, that's good. I mean, that's good even for the price, especially if you're going to limit his the need for him to play the run. He's not a hold the point type of guy. He's not going to make a ton of not even plays against the run. He's just going to get moved off the ball, and I think he'll be effective as a pass rusher. I think the more you use the phrase smoke and mirrors for Brian Flores' defense a couple of years ago. And I think if you look at the last 2 years of moves, the whole organization is saying, we want less of that. We want less trickeration. We want more 4-man rush, go get the quarterback, play some man coverage behind it like Flores used to always do in Miami. And less of, hey, we're sending 5, we're sending 6. Do we have that? Absolutely. Can we play smoke and mirrors? Yes. But we can also play we're just going to rush 4 and play sound coverage on the back end. And now Minnesota, the fact that they could trot out Jonathan Grenard, Andrew Van Ginkel, Jonathan Allen, and Javon Hargrave on passing downs. And oh, by the way, Dallas Turner, last year's first-round pick, him and Van Ginkel, very athletic. They can drop into coverage. So many options now for Brian Flores. That's what they've given. And if there's one thing that defines Brian Flores' defense, it is variation, mixing it up. We see him as this heavy blitz guy, but that's not what he was in New England. That's not what he was in Miami. I think he could do it all. and I think he can adjust to the personnel. So I think Kwesi's just given so many excellent pass rushing options that the Vikings are going to be very difficult on second and third down, on passing downs. Very difficult. And they've been good on early downs, once again, from a run defense standpoint. So I love the options that they've added on the defensive side. I think both Hargrave and Allen will make an impact as pass rushers.
I mean, that defensive front should be nasty. Like, you've got a ton of pass rushers. You've got a ton of guys that can now get after the quarterback and win one-on-ones. They're probably, I think, going to maintain that. It's not necessarily a super high blitz strategy, but they're, I think, going to remain like confusing to defenses, right? They may only send 4, but they might not be the 4 you're expecting them to send. You've got Ivan Pace Jr., who's a real blitz threat as a linebacker as well. My concern for them is still the secondary is still like an issue. I mean, Harrison Smith and Josh Metellus are good safeties. They've got Theo Jackson still there as well. I think they can still go 3 guys with that safety group. They paid a ton of money to keep Byron Murphy Jr. Like, Byron Murphy's been pretty good for them. I don't know if he's been as good as they're paying him. It sort of felt like that's a deal they were trying to get done for a long time. And it kind of felt like Byron Murphy won that negotiation. You know what I mean? Like, that price just seemed to keep going up and up and up. And eventually they're like, the secondary, like the corner spot is so barren as it is. We just can't let him out of the building, because otherwise we're going to go get like 3 corners. So I think they just went to where he wanted them to go, and they've ended up paying him a ton of money.
It's rookie contract prices. That's what we're paying here. That's what New England's paying. That's what the Commanders are paying. It's rookie contract prices. You can afford, because you're just going to have extra cap money sitting around. You're just going to have money sitting around.
Right, but they don't have. I mean, they don't have endless cap money. Like, still not a reason necessarily to go give. Like, he's now one of the best paid corners in the NFL, and I don't know that he's anywhere near that level. And they still need 2 corners potentially.
No, they brought in Isaiah Rodgers. They have Mekhi Blackmon coming back off of injury. If they had to start the season today, that's not a bad group. I disagree. I don't think that's a bad group.
I don't think that's good. I mean, number one, Mekhi Blackmon, I think he's their best corner, but he's working on a really small sample size of any kind of play, and he's coming back from an ACL injury. Isaiah Rodgers, the second he came into the lineup for the Philadelphia Eagles, was immediately the target guy on that defense. Like, Rodgers was lit up the second he came into the lineup for that defense. Now, part of that is because, okay, he's clearly the guy you would want to go after if the alternative is the players that they had outside. But I would not want Isaiah Rodgers starting for me. So I think they still need at least 1 starting corner, maybe 2 if Mekhi Blackmon is not able to come back and hit the ground running.
I mean, I would still invest. I would still invest in corner. Sorry, I thought you were done. I would still invest in corner, but I think they'll be okay if this is what they're trotting out there, especially with their pass rush and what they have up front. So I don't know. I like where they are. Everybody they signed comes with risk. So we got to put both sides of this. I like the moves, given where Minnesota is, where their needs are, where things may have fallen apart last year. I think the defensive interior was a massive need. They addressed it. The offensive line, the interior of the O-line, was a massive need. They addressed it. Because it's free agency, of course it all comes with risk. Will Fries is essentially 2 years out of 4 as a starter. And his best play came in a 5-game sample before getting hurt last year. There's risk attached there. If you told me a year ago Will Fries is going to make $88 million over 5 years, or told anybody in the NFL that was the case, they'd say, you're crazy. So that was 5 games ago, by the way. So risk attached to it. Ryan Kelly, a little bit older, injury concerns. And as you mentioned before, some decline in Jonathan Allen's game, some decline in Javon Hargrave's game, plus injuries for both players. Obviously, there's downside to all of these moves, but there's a lot of upside in a lot of these moves as well. And that's, I think, where Minnesota's playing right now. A 14-win team just spent a lot of money on players that, even if 2 out of the 4 make a big impact, the Vikings have a better team next year. Even if it's not, it's going to be difficult for it to show up in wins, as we've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, the other moves, obviously, I really like bringing back Aaron Jones at running back. It's basically $10 million a year for him. He makes a difference to them when he's on the field. Now, again, he's an injury risk, an injury question mark, but that gives them some flexibility, right? A lot of people were saying the Vikings have to go draft a running back high in this draft. they don't have many draft picks. They're only picking like twice in the first 3 rounds, and they've only got 4 picks total. So I don't know that they have the ability to just spend 24 on a running back. Now they don't have to because you bring back Aaron Jones. I think that's an important move for them. And then this whole, Darnold thing, letting him walk frees up a ton of money to go and spend like this, to go and, to go to Fogo and blow the budget on all the stakes. So, that's a decision they have to make. That's a factor in this as well.
Who can we let walk so we can go to Fogo? Forget it. Detroit Lions up next as we wrap up the NFC North. TJ Reed, one of your favorite moves, as you mentioned earlier, comes into play, starting corner coming from the Jets, and then some lesser moves, right? Like Levi Onwuzurike coming back for 1 year, $5.5 million. Love it, love that. Injury risk, yes. Marcus Davenport, 1 year, $4.75 million. Love it. Injury risk, yes. They also re-signed Derek Barnes, 3 years, $25 million, and then Roy Lopez comes in 1 year, $4.65 million. To play defensive tackle. Nate Tice loves Roy Lopez. I think he's okay.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, for a run-stopping defensive tackle. It's a lot of run-stopping defensive tackles with mediocre PFF run-stopping grades around the league. Just saying. But yeah, these are all fine moves for the Lions. We had some questions in the chat yesterday from our bill-paying Lions fans. Hey, why are the Lions not making all these moves? Here's where they are. The reason why the Lions aren't going to crush free agency is because they've drafted so well the last couple of years. They need the money freed up to sign all their stars. Because this isn't 1 year financial planning here when you get into free agency. It's not like, hey, I've got $70 million to spend. Let's spend every single dollar. Every team's looking at this 2 and 3 years out and saying, what's coming up? And we already saw the Lions pay Amon-Ra St. Brown and Penei Sewell. Well, Aiden Hutchinson's coming up next. And right around the corner is all of the picks that they got the following year. Brian Branch, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, if they want to re-sign him, right? They have plenty of players who are probably going to be worth paying in a couple of years. So that's why you can't just go crazy in free agency right now.
Yeah. I mean, also you look at the team and you're like, where do you want them to go crazy to, like, where are we going crazy to bring in additions, to bring in upgrades? Like, it's not a team in desperate need of like major fixes. I mean, the Vikings had significant holes in multiple spots, and so they've spent significant money. They went to Fogo, they brought in all the meat. The Lions didn't need to do that. Like, you looked at the cornerback room and you're like, yeah, okay, I would like to see somebody come in there because that's a potential problem spot on the defense. So, but they don't have like a ton of those. They have a couple of spots where you're like, yeah, we could mess around with the edges here, but they got the draft upcoming. They made the big move for DJ Reed, which I think is an important and good one. But I don't see the need, just because they have some salary cap space, to be like, yeah, let's go spend it.
Yeah, so they have to have multi-year planning for Detroit, and I'm with you. The roster's in good shape. I like the DJ Reed move to fill that spot. And as I've said with the other teams that I like, you go into the draft without major needs. I mean, I don't know if is there even a spot where they're missing a starter? Like, they brought back Derek Barnes. They re-signed him to go with Alex Anzalone and Jack Campbell. That was when we were at camp a couple of years ago, we're like, man, they're 4 deep at linebacker in a league that usually plays 2 on most downs. They're deep. If anything, it's defensive line. And, adding for under $10 million, bringing back Levi Onwuzurike and Marcus Davenport. And how many snaps has Davenport played over the last 2 years? Like 12?
Not a lot.
Fine. But for under $10 million, if you get one player out of those 2, Davenport's played 227 snaps over the last 2 years. But if you get one player out of those 2, when the going rate for some of these other defensive linemen is double and triple, that's not bad. So load up on some young defensive linemen in the draft. I think that will be the biggest thing for Detroit going forward here. But yeah, they don't have a ton of holes that needed to be addressed.
Yeah, I mean, they released Darius Smith, which does kind of open up that gap even further on that defensive line, which I think is a potential issue for them. So you're right. The draft is an obvious place to fill that need. 28 overall, that bottom of the first round, you can get a guy to come in and make an impact. I also do wonder, though, like, with that kind of cap space ammunition, with some draft picks to play with, bottom of the first round, bottom of the second round type of area. Like, I wonder, are the Lions a potential trade partner for Cincinnati for Trey Hendrickson? Like, that's the kind of cap space that would let you trade for Trey Hendrickson and pay him the contract that he wants. I'm not saying that's what they're going to do. You're right. Like, saving that money is relevant because a lot of it is earmarked for future contracts, right? Aiden Hutchinson is going to have to get paid big money pretty soon, but they have enough that they could make that kind of big splash move happen to fill one of the few areas that is a potential weakness.
I love that. I mean, Hendrickson rushes against the left tackle. He rushes off the right side. Hutch always rushes off the left side. Oh, man, I love that as an option. Make that happen, Lions. Anyway, good. I thought a good free agent period for the Lions for where their roster is. But yeah, I'm with you. Like, if they have room, if they can make all the finances work, they're going to have decisions to make. Like, when you draft that well, those 4 picks from a couple of years ago, you'll have 5th-year options on Gibbs and Campbell, but Branch comes up quick and Laporta comes up quickly. I think of those 4, I think Branch and Laporta, I would probably want to re-up even more than they're going to want to keep Gibbs around. But like, what's the order of those 4 that you want to keep around? I think Branch and Laporta might be 1 and 2. And nothing against Jahmyr Gibbs. They're going to keep him, I think, too. But it's a lot of guys that they have to keep over the next 3 or 4 years here. Anyway, like what the Lions have done, as always. Let's go NFC South. Carolina Panthers. I think they're one of the more fascinating teams as well because they had a ton of money to spend. They were in on Milton Williams. So they come away with Tershawn Wharton, 3 years, over $54 million. Trevon Merrick, 3 years, $51 million. They kicked it all off with J.C. Horn, 4 years, $100 million, being re-signed. So massive investment on the defensive side of the ball. Patrick Jones, the second, on the edge, 2 years up to $20 million. Bobby Brown the third, 3 years, $21 million. Rico Dowdle at running back for 1 year, $3 million. Good job. Dr. Eager got his one signing in there, a $3 million running back. Good to see that in there. And then Michael Jackson at corner. They got some pretty good play out of him. 2 years, $14.5 million coming back. A few other moves in there as well. What'd you make of the Panthers haul here?
Yeah, when you factor in that the kind of defensive moves in free agency were plan B, plan A was Milton Williams. The reports were that they were in on him. They thought they had a deal done with him at one point, and then the Patriots basically just went, we're not going to be denied on Milton Williams. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep raising the paddle in the auction until we win the thing. When you factor that in, I think pivoting, drawing a line in the sand and saying this is the financial number we're not willing to go beyond, and then getting in Tershawn Wharton, getting in Patrick Jones, getting in Bobby Brown the third. I think that's a pretty good backup option. Like I think that demonstrates pretty sound process, right? To say, look, good as Milton Williams is, let's maintain value. This is what this is worth. This is what we're willing to pay. This is the line at which we're not willing to bid higher in the auction, and then pivot, take that money and spend it on Tershawn Wharton, who's been a really good rotational pass rushing, disruptive player for the Chiefs over the last few years. Patrick Jones, they've upgraded that defensive line with that spending. I think that's a pretty good process.
I'm fascinated to see it happen. By the way, I think had misinformation on the Dowdle contract. I think he's over $6 million for 1 year. Either way, with inflation, pretty solid running back deal there for a guy that was productive last year for the Cowboys. Panthers defensive line, they had massive needs anyway. I think they're still drafting one of the best defensive linemen in the draft at 8. So you add that guy to the mix. It's all right. I think it's all right. I can't wait to see what this looks like. Tershawn Wharton still, as he had some great games. I know Chiefs fans probably love him, but as a compliment to Chris Jones and Karlaftis and Amenahue, he was fine. It's just everyone where I'm lukewarm. It is defensive tackles who I think are making more than they're worth. And so that's what the market is. I get it. The scarcity, I get it. But Tershawn Wharton, Bobby Brown, and Pat Jones, like they're all the 5th best defensive linemen on their respective teams last year. And those guys are combined to make a ton of money here. So I'll be interested to see how that works. They got Derek Brown coming back off of injury. If you do add, like if Mason Graham falls, it's probably not a Mason Graham at this point with the defensive tackles that they have here, but name your favorite edge, Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams, James Pierce, Mike Green, whoever it is at 8 for the Panthers. You add that guy to the mix with Jadeveon Clowney, and it's a much deeper rotation than it was last year. But they had to pay. They had to pay for it, and pay for J.C. Horn and pay for Trayvon Merrick. So there's a lot of investment on the defensive side of the ball for a team that had one of the worst defenses last year. So something had to give here.
The J.C. Horn one is really interesting. Like, at his best, I think he's worth that money, but he's really low on sample size of being at his best at that level between injuries and just the volatility at cornerback. And, who knows how much the injuries had a residual effect once he was back on the field. But like, they're basically paying him. I mean, he's paid as the highest paid corner in the NFL, right? He and Patrick Surtain, who were the sort of 2-star corners of that draft class. And, some people liked Horn, some people liked Surtain. They got effectively the same contract. Actually, Horn got more than Surtain. Like, based off their careers so far, that's crazy. I mean, there's no justification for J.C. Horn to have more money than Patrick Surtain based off their current, based off the resume that each one of them has in the NFL.
No, I agree. I mean, it's a defense of a bunch of players making probably more than you would expect, and that's just where the Panthers are right now, and the needs that they had on the defensive side of the ball. So the only reason why we've been calling it a plan B, and I compared it to the Moneyball line where they say we'll replace Giambi in the aggregate, is because the Panthers thought they had the deal for Milton Williams, right? They were right there for Milton Williams, presumably at $24-25 million a year. And they end up at about $35 million for 3 players, right? With Wharton, Patrick Jones, Bobby Brown. And so rolling 7 and 8 deep is important on the defensive line, and that's what they're doing. But, these guys are like low to high end rotational players historically. That's what they are.
GM Steve, which would you prefer if you were given those 3 guys for 35-ish million a year, or Milton Williams for 26, let's say 26 and a hair to get above New England? Which would you have preferred?
I'd probably go Milton Williams. I'd probably want that. And then I would be in on Zerike on the cheap, and I would be in on the cheaper options elsewhere, at defensive tackle to offset that. That's what I would prefer. And look, I don't love any of these guys at the price, but Milton Williams, I think that level of upside at his age would be the number one plan. I think that was what Carolina's number one plan was, because I don't think they're signing. They might sign Bobby Brown for his 3 years, $21 million. I would say Treshaun Wharton and Pat Jones those are the 2 that probably equal Milton Williams. But you can almost put all 3 in there.
Well, this is the fascinating kind of discussion around free agency. Like, it's great to sort of say, this is player X, these are the targets we want, and this is the amount we want to pay for them. And then you have the market factors, like this is how much they're actually gonna, it's when you get in the auction, right? Like, how much is what's really interesting, I think, is because each player is one of one, right? And then even within broadening it to similar players, like players that are of a same type, it's a small market, right? So it is very much like an auction, like an antique auction or a car auction or whatever. You're like, well, theoretically, this car, this vintage Jag E-Type is worth this amount of money, right? But there's only 25 of these things left in the world. This is the first one that's come up for auction in X number of years. Like, to what extent is it I want this car, even if I have to overpay for it, right? And okay, the difference being we're in a closed system with the salary cap, right? So everything, like every amount above the amount you think it's worth is taking away from something else, which is not the case for a classic car auction. I mean, if you've got the money, you've got the money. Who cares how much it's costing? But it does create this interesting dynamic where I do wonder at what point you should just be overpaying for the guys you think are the difference makers, and then using the amount you overpay to affect like the rest of your budget, right? So you want to pay $24 million a year for Milton Williams. Crap, the Patriots are being a pain in the ass. They want him as well. So you've got to go to 26 and a half, right? But if you go to 26.5, you get Milton Williams, and then you go, well, okay, that's now $2.5 million less a year that we have to play with for the rest of the pool. Just like that's the readjustment that you should make, as opposed to, drawing this sort of firm line in the sand financially for every single player and saying we're not going to go higher than this for any guy. And then you end up with this sort of roster of plan Bs, right? Which is, is that better or worse? I don't know. But that's where I think it becomes a really interesting analysis of like who's doing a good or a bad job as a GM, right? Because it's not just talent identification. It's, are you willing to go financially to a place where other people aren't? And if you're not, then what do you end up with?
Well, I think let me just add two more points to the mix here. And it's less Panther specific, but let's just talk ball, Sam. One, the chat kind of reminds me when you look at like Dexter Lawrence is now like a top 10 to 12 paid defensive tackle.
Yeah.
I think a big part of the residual effect of all of this pay is what happens to the players who have already been paid and they're looking at the market and like, now I'm upset. I think we're going to get a whole bunch of elite players who are only making 22, 24, 28 million saying, all right, let's go back to the table. Come back to the table, please. I want a pay raise. I think this is going to affect. So there's a couple ways of looking at this. Yeah, the market's crazy and it's more than this guy or that guy. I think the teams that are sitting pretty like, we got Dexter Lawrence on the cheap now. Dexter Lawrence is going to come back and say, give me 30, right? We're going to see more of that over these next couple of years because of this cap rise and what we just saw in free agency. That's my first point.
Have you seen any analysis of, so I think you're right. This is a really underreported or under talked about aspect of this dynamic, right? Getting your players signed early is now seen as like the cheat code. Look at how he's locking guys up before you get them signed before you have to, right?
Until they get mad.
There's two issues with that. Number one, if you get him signed early and he's not the guy you thought he was, you saddled yourself with the money before you had to, right? So this is the Carson Wentz deal. You got him signed early and then Carson Wentz fell apart and suddenly, oh crap, we were stuck with this deal and they end up having to get away from it. Now, that's fine. You might say it's worth it. The second aspect is the more team friendly the deal is, the more likely it is that guy's going to come back to the table early and be like, dude, I need more money because I'm now getting paid less than this scrub who just happened to sign later than me. Have you ever seen an analysis over whether that happens? Like how much of a factor that do they come back to the table more? Do you actually end up paying them more long term, even though it looked at the time like you got them locked up for the cheap?
This is like Bengals and Cowboys saying, see, I told you,
right?
You don't want to do it too early. I haven't seen analysis on it. I have a feeling the next year or two, we're going to see more of that than ever. And we're going to see contracts ripped up, like somewhat fresh contracts ripped up and restructured. And just because of the cap raises the last 2 years, the way it's risen the last 2 years has been ridiculous. And so I think we'll see more of that. I haven't seen analysis on it specifically on the best way to do it. Or, I mean, maybe there is a world where that's what you just keep money aside and you do a guy a solid and say, hey, Dexter, we paid you. He's making 22.5 a year. We're going to bring you up to 28. You happy now? Like we're going to bring you up to, a pretty high point here. Here's the one other point that I wanted to make, because I've talked to some executives and I've talked to some people that you've seen studies on where teams think about their team building situation and they tag certain number of high-end players that you need on a roster. And it's not always the best analysis, but it's at least a structure. Like the best teams in the league have 7 of these players or 8 of these players, and however you define those players, right? Using your, free agency grades, your pro grades, whatever it might be. So like what Washington's doing right now, it almost looks like they're doing that study, which is the best teams have 8, let's call them, foundational players, 8 players on a team. And Adam Peters got there and it's like, we have 2, right? And then they found creative ways, and Larry Tunsil's one of them. Deebo Samuel's one. Marshawn Lattimore's one. Now we know Jaden Daniels is after a draft. They had Terry McLaurin. That was like the one guy that they knew, right? And now they're finding ways to build these bricks so they can get to 6 to 8 of these foundational players, say. And you can almost feel Washington doing that, right? Whereas in Carolina's point here, they were going for like one of these players in Milton Williams. And if you don't get there, then the next 3 that you get aren't in that category, right? So you're building in the aggregate and you're kind of back to square one. I just think those are interesting discussions when you see, I think that was what the Rams were doing for years when they said, we need 7 or 8 of these guys. And they had Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald and Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp, and they got there, right? At certain points. So anyway, I just think that's another interesting discussion when you can see certain teams saying, we want to have not stars and scrubs, but we need to have 6 to 8 of these players above a certain standard. Whereas other teams just, if you don't get there, then it all has to be built in the aggregate. And when it's built in the aggregate, you end up overpaying for a whole bunch of different players where you're more willing to pay for those, I don't know, foundational players, we'll call them. That all makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Great. I think it's fun to discuss. Let's go Saints. Saints have made a couple moves. Devon Gottschall traded from the New England Patriots for a 7. So they bring him in, former LSU product. LSU's Justin Reed as well. No. Is he LSU? No, he's Stanford. Who was I thinking? Oh, I was thinking of Honey Badger's back. Didn't they bring him back? He's not on the list here. And Chase Young back. So Justin Reed comes in from the Chiefs, 3 years, $31 million. Chase Young, 3 years, $51 million. We talked about that deal the other day. That's solid deal for a guy that's become a solid player. And Juwan Johnson comes back, re-signed at tight end, 3 years, $30 million. Don't mind this haul for the Saints. You know, they're still up against it from a cap perspective. They still don't have massive flexibility, but they brought in, re-signed a couple of their own and brought in a solid player like Justin Reed.
Yeah, I mean, the Saints, it does feel like they're inching closer to like resetting the way that they approach the salary cap. Remember, they were the team for years that would max out the credit card, pay it off every free agent period, cut half the roster, bring in a few guys and get cap compliant. And now it does seem like they're getting closer to actually approaching that more like the rest of the NFL, and that this is as close as they're going to come to that, the credit card bill really becoming due and having to shift everything. What do you make, though, the biggest sort of decision, I guess, for the Saints has been the Derek Carr thing, right? I think everyone kind of expected them at some point to be like, well, this is the point we move on from Derek Carr, and we now don't really have a quarterback. Is it going to be Spencer Rattler this year? Whatever. That doesn't seem to be happening. They appear to be keeping Carr at least for a year. And that's a big chunk of their salary cap.
I think it's one more year of Carr, right? So here's how I view it. I think they can remember when Derek Carr signed, we made the same statement that you said you hate. We can get out of it after 2 years. We can get out of it, right? Obviously, that's not a reason to sign somebody. They can get out of it next year and be in pretty good shape. So the question was, do we just roll with nobody this year, or do we at least have a quarterback? And I don't think to rebuild, I don't think you need to tank, so to speak. You don't need to only win 3 games to rebuild. So I think it's still a rebuilding move for Derek Carr. Eat the money this year. They have to draft well this year. They have to draft. They have a lot of picks. They have more than 7 picks for the first time in like 9 years, whatever it is. So they're going to draft in volume. It's a reset year, but a reset year doesn't need to be a give up. We'll just throw Spencer Rattler out there, hope he develops, and if we lose 2 games, we're picking up Arch Manning. So I don't think it's if we win 2 games. I don't think it's a tank for Arch. You don't have to tank for Arch to show that you're rebuilding. And I think the Saints are rebuilding by just kind of eating all the money this year on Carr, get out of the contract next year, and move on to the next guy. But you should be searching for the next guy this year and next year as you're trying to get to the next, phase of the Saints rebuild.
Yeah, they have over $50 million already in dead cap space from players that just aren't even there anymore. So they're doing some work to kind of correct that roster.
You want to eat that, like having Carr's cap hit this year, which is essentially what they did, right? A big chunk of it this year, and then they can get out of it next year, from my understanding here. or at least in a better spot. I mean, it's still going to be some dead money, but
well, they're in a position where like it becomes tricky to eat Derek Carr. Like to get rid of him now involves the juggling act of the salary cap just to eat that dead hit.
Yeah, they have to push it is essentially what happened. So they're
yeah.
forced there, but they're also in the spot like we talked about with the Raiders. Like if I was running the Raiders, I would say 2026 is our year to be back on track. And if I was running the Saints, I would say 2026 is our year. But good luck convincing Pete Carroll to do that. Good luck convincing Kellen Moore to do that. And by the way, it's easier for the Saints to say we can compete in this division, right? We're not that far off
every year
from the Bucs and the Falcons in the South. Whereas if you're the Raiders, you should legitimately be saying, actually, 2027 is the year the Chiefs will be vulnerable, and Herbert and the Broncos, like that's when we should really be attacking this thing to be competing. But like if you're in the South, you can convince yourself every year we'll win the division. I get it. So I think that's where they are, is they're battling this full reset versus, well, Derek Carr's still good enough to win games, which he is. He's good enough. He's good enough in any year to win 9 or 10 games for a team. He is. If everything around him is good. It's just not everything around him is good right now with the Saints.
There.
Did I answer your question? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything else on the Saints?
No, I mean it's been a pretty quiet offseason. I mean, re-signing Chase Young at that price is pretty interesting. We talked about this before in one of our reactions or roundups. It feels like an overpay, but I think we're in a weird spot where it's sort of conditioned. Like I think it's actually fair money for him now. Like we're in there's this bizarre disconnect between what we think Chase Young should have become, what he's actually become, and then where a bunch of his career has been, where it's sort of been injured and ineffective. Based off recent history, Chase Young is well deserving of that contract and has actually become like a very solid starting edge rusher. It's just that's a million miles from, the Nick Bosa Defensive Player of the Year candidate that we thought he would be if he stayed healthy.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. And they have such a need on the defensive line. When we talk about, I see the chat talk a lot about this guy's good at drafting, this guy's bad at drafting. I like to reiterate the fact that I don't think that there's no long-term, this guy's good, this guy's bad. The Saints had a great run of, if you looked at hit rates, or if you looked at what they brought in, and if you look at the 2017 class, which was historic, they had an unbelievable run. They've hit a lull drafting. I think Dallas has had an unbelievable run. I think you could question their last 2, maybe 3 drafts, especially at the top. And so if you say, I see people, hey, Kwesi's not good at drafting. It's like, all right, we'll give him a couple more years. We'll see. There's maybe some people are just awful at drafting, but over time it seems to be a little cyclical. Saints have hit a rough patch drafting, and so they've missed on a lot of defensive linemen. So bringing Chase Young in at 3 years, $51 million is pretty good for a major need that they have. We got 6 teams to still discuss here. 5 teams to still discuss. We already did the Rams. Atlanta Falcons. Falcons were very quiet early in free agency. They did release Grady Jarrett, and then some second-tier type of moves. Mike Hughes comes back, re-signed him to play corner opposite A.J. Terrell. Leonard Floyd got released by the San Francisco 49ers. The Falcons got him within a day, 1 year, $10 million. They do need pass rush help. I think Floyd, at least moves that in the right direction, adds some depth. I don't know if he solves it. Divine Diablo comes over, linebacker from the Raiders for 2 years, $14 million, and a couple other lesser re-signings here for the Falcons.
Yeah, good news is there's some teams that didn't do a whole lot, so we're not going to spend a ton of time on them. I like Leonard Floyd as an addition. I think, 1 year, $10 million. We said, the book on Leonard Floyd, if you like, is that if you have a pass rush, he's a really useful complementary piece, but he can't lead the line by himself. The Falcons just need additions on the pass rushing front, whether it's interior or edge rusher. Presumably, they're going to be targeting that in the draft. They also have that group that they drafted last year after they spent their top pick on Michael Penix. In their eyes, I guess they would imagine or hope one or two of those guys will work out. We can draft another guy this year, and Leonard Floyd is at least a solid complementary piece there. So I think that's a solid move for them. But of course, the thing looming over all of this is, what are they going to do with Kirk Cousins, who, they signed a year ago? They're now kind of stuck with this contract. They have to pay him a bonus if they keep him around, which is significant. He doesn't want to be around because he can probably try and work a starting gig somewhere else. So they're in this weird spot where it's painful to keep him and it's painful to get rid of him.
65 million dead with a straight cut.
Right. Which is that's this year, like a pre-June 1st designation, right?
Right. Post June 1st, it's 40 this year and then 12 and a half over the next 2 years. So it's
which is
less
what I
money.
imagine they would have to do.
It would be post. So you'd eat 40 million. And look, this is why we felt not great about the Broncos last year. They were eating like 80 something million in dead money. They got the 6th quarterback off the board and they had a pretty good looking, like an okay looking roster. So quarterback questions and all that dead money coming off of Russell Wilson. And within a year, they completely changed perception. It was like, well, we found Bo Nix. He looks pretty good. And we dealt with that cap hit last year and still made the playoffs. So this is, it's workable. It's doable, but everything else has to be pretty good. And if Atlanta's hit on Michael Penix Jr., I don't think they care about the debt. I would eat the dead money as soon as possible and move on and get to, enjoying the fruits of the rookie contract quarterback in 2026 and 27.
Yeah, I mean, the only issue is they don't have a ton of cap space to play with or a ton of easily restructurable contracts that can free up a ton of space. So it's not trivial to like free up the kind of dead cap space that they need to get rid of Kirk Cousins. This is why I think they want to keep him around, because it isn't easy to get rid of him. Number one, I don't think anyone wants to trade for that contract. So I don't think you can trade him away, because I think he's seen as a backup option at this point, or at most, competition, bridge quarterback, whatever. I don't see a team trading for that contract. So you have to cut him, at which point minimum you need to free up like $40 million worth of salary cap space in order to eat that dead cap hit. The easiest thing for Atlanta is to eat it this year. Remember, like, again, this world of like, well, how quickly can you get out of this contract, right? When they drafted Michael Penix, the general kind of consensus was this is a 2-year project, right? Cousins starts for 2 years, and then there's a natural sort of break point in this contract. That's the point where you toss the keys to the kid and say, take over from here, Michael, it's yours. Now, they ended up doing that halfway through the season because of Cousins, but that means that if you want to accelerate that by a year, it's going to be painful, and that's the tough position they're in.
Yeah, and there's only 5 draft picks as well. So it's not going to feel great for the Falcons. They're kind of, I think it's a quiet offseason for them right now. Figure out the Cousins thing because of some go for it moves. They traded from Matthew Judon last year, right? Some of the moves they made to give up those draft picks. So they're sitting there at 5. They could use, I think, more volume from a drafting perspective, especially with all their defensive line needs. I know they drafted 3 last year, but they need more. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with those picks. I would try to take 15 and trade down as much as I could, and if that exists, like if that's possible. But the Cousins thing is the next big thing to keep an eye on for the Falcons. And we'll wrap up the NFC South with the Bucs. Started with Chris Godwin coming back, 3 years, $66 million. Supposedly gave up over $30 million per year with the New England Patriots. At least that was what was reported. So getting Godwin back, I thought was huge. They bring in Hassan Reddick, 1 year, $14 million to fill an edge rush spot. Also brought back Anthony Nelson on the edge, so they've got their defensive line depth. And Levante David is back once again, 1 year, $10 million back once again. They also re-signed Kyle Trask, which I just saw from Greg Allman from Bucs beat writer. Sam, this was an historic signing by the Tampa Bay Bucs. History was made. This was the first quarterback the Bucs have ever drafted and then signed to a second contract, Kyle Trask. He's never started a game, but it's the first time the Bucs have ever drafted and then subsequently re-signed a quarterback that they drafted.
I mean, I always knew it would be Kyle Trask that was the guy that breaks that trend.
He's just sitting there enjoying clipboard holding and like, don't call on me, guys. I'll be here. I'll be here supporting Brady, supporting Baker. I'm there. Good job by Kyle Trask.
Good job by Kyle. Yeah, I mean, so their season has been, or their off season so far, their free agent period has largely been about retaining their own guys. You know, Chris Godwin coming back, Levante David coming back, like important players coming back for them. The Godwin thing is interesting. I mean, that sounds crazy, right? That he sort of gave up that amount of money more from the Patriots to stay in Tampa Bay. I would want to see how close that really was, structure wise, guaranteed money wise, those types of things before. Like, that's a
Plus
wild
taxes.
number.
Plus cost of living, Florida versus Massachusetts.
Yeah. But
it might not be $8 million a year significant, but it's close.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know enough about finances and taxes to have a genuine, like, hard take on how important that is. I sort of feel like most of those things, like, it's not, no tax here, tax here. Oh, wow, I'm like way, way, way better off in the place with no tax. Like, they get it back with different taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, whatever. Like, it's not like one is 25% of your money better than the other one. It's like, it's just, anyway, whatever. But I would be interested how much real money that was he was giving up to stay in Tampa Bay. I think it's a good situation for him to return to. And obviously, like, he thinks that as well. But I do wonder, like, was it that much of a bigger offer to go back versus the Patriots? Because it's not like, I mean, okay, New England has some problems, but they do have Drake May. I mean, it's not like you're going to a place with no quarterback to work with. You know what I mean? It's still, there's selling points in New England as well.
No, there are. I think it's cold, big for the Bucs, though. It is colder. Big for the Bucs, though. Godwin's coming off of an injury, so maybe it is a big investment in him coming off another injury. But having Evans, Godwin, and now Jalen McMillan locked in, pretty good spot. And then bringing in Reddick off the edge. I mean, if he shows up to play and all that fun stuff. But it's him and Yaya Diaby, last year's second-round pick, Chris Braswell, brought back Anthony Nelson, as I mentioned. So they've got good depth up front. Having Levante David back, even though they might have a linebacker need next to him. Very important stuff. So they're in a pretty good spot. They're another one of those teams that they can go into the draft without glaring needs. Could they use another young pass rusher because Reddick's only there for a year? Absolutely. Offensive line help? Absolutely. Maybe more dynamic tight end? For sure. But they're in a good spot where I think just retaining their own. And look, while I've always seen the Bucs as not able to compete with the best teams in the NFC, but as other teams have turnover, like, I don't think they're as good as the Lions. I still don't think they're as good as the Eagles, but as other teams have turnover and the Bucs keep this nucleus together, I think that bodes well for them to be, like, I think they're separating a little bit or getting closer to maybe some of those other teams just by maintaining. While teams like the Niners have all that turnover, the Bucs are able to retain right now. So I think that's where they're in a good spot, and another good draft from Jason Light, and it's even that much better.
Well, that's the benefit of that sort of steady, keep knocking on the door approach, is that if you do keep knocking on the door, the teams that were in your way may fall out of it if they manage, if they don't do a good enough job of managing and maintaining and keeping where they are. So I think that's a solid point there. Somebody in the chat there, Bedlamkin, points out that even the sales tax thing, like, half your games, you're paying the tax wherever the away venue is, right? So you're only actually saving half the money, the games that are at home, unless your away games are, team or places that don't have income tax as well. So it's, again, I don't think that that's quite as big a deal as it's made out to be most of the time.
Can we get a tax expert to do the math on this?
Yeah. I'm really curious how much that actually saves you if you factor in, mansion property taxes and sales taxes and VAT and all that kind of crap.
Here's your problem. You can make $30 million living in and around Foxborough, Massachusetts, with eight or nine home games, right? Or Tampa at $22 million, 8 or 9 home games, living on North Del Mabry or something. I don't know where you live in Tampa. Living in Tampa, St. Pete, somewhere over there. Shout out to North Del Mabry and the Yankees complex where we used to stay during spring training or college. Our college spring break, which is right around now, right? College spring break. We would go down to Tampa every year to kick off our season, Sam. So somebody, one of our tax experts in the chat, somebody handled all
we got to have a tax expert listener, right? Somebody's got to be able to do at least back of the napkin math on that for us.
Yeah. So let's say $30 million in New England versus $22 million in Tampa Bay. back of the napkin math. Is this a push? Is it, $1 million in favor of Tampa the other way? What are we looking at here?
By the way, throwback to a draft show a few years ago. I almost just did the Chris Collinsworth and had to kick my desk out from under me because my hamstring almost cramped up.
Oh man, Chris. Chris is great on TV during the regular season, but the offseason, he just loses his mind in the offseason. He just it's an inside joke, Sam, but if people have followed us for the last 10 years, you just never know when Chris is going to, untuck his shirt and put his mic in strange places and kick the table and everything. Anyway, kick the table kick was classic.
Yeah.
So it's 7 years ago now, Sam.
Long time.
NFC West, let's wrap it up. 3 more teams to discuss here. San Francisco 49ers. Interesting year for the Niners. They're going to have 900 comp picks next year, right? Because they haven't brought much in. But everybody's signing. They might set a record. Is there a record? Is there a cap on their comp picks? They're going to have a ton of comp picks. Everybody's signing. The biggest news, though, Mac Jones. Kyle Shanahan has signed Mac Jones, 2 years, $7 million. They finally get Mac Jones in San Francisco.
Well, if the reports were accurate that Kyle Shanahan really wanted Mac Jones all along, when they traded 3 first-round picks to get number 3 overall, that the target was Mac Jones, and he was eventually talked off the ledge, and it became Trey Lance, and that was an unmitigated disaster. If those were accurate, then Brock Purdy's not getting $55, $60 million a year anymore. In fact, he's expendable. We can get rid of him right now. We got Mac Jones.
Now, there's more Mac Jones data points out there right now.
That is true, and they haven't been good.
No.
Most of them.
Since 2021, they have not been good. So the Mac Jones data points are not great, but an interesting backup signing here. They also bring in Demarcus Robinson, 2 years, $9.5 million. That guy's just come good these last few years after being the guy that was always adjacent to bad stuff in Jalen Reagor style. Every time the ball was thrown his way in Kansas City, he's become a pretty dependable player, especially in the red zone for the Rams. So like that move. Luke Farrell making 3 years, $20 million as a blocking tight end. Other than that, though, for the Niners, it's all about players out the door and recent draft picks needing to step up and replace those players.
Jalen Reagor, by the way, who got re-signed the other day. Fair play to him.
Yeah.
That's a real testament to just how badly you can play and still end up being employed by the NFL.
There's this list of players that I would always go and get because they have some level of speed and upside. And go ahead, ask your question.
You would kick the tire. Jalen Reagor would be on your list of guys to bring in every year.
He is the opposite. I would never bring in Jalen Reagor. No offense to Jalen Reagor. Even if he had a 50 catch season, for every 50 catches that he has, I think he's responsible for probably 5 turnovers. There's going to be some wrong route in there that leads to not just like an incompletion, a legitimate pick. So the downside with Reagor is just not enough. But the upside with John Ross was like, I'm going to get some 50-yard touchdowns here. But he's not going to cost me turnovers. Like Jalen Reagor is going to cost turnovers. He's on my never list.
Right. No, that makes sense.
Again, no offense, not personal, Jalen. I liked him coming out of college. But seen him play since then. So who's out for the Niners? Do we have this list?
Well, Debo traded away. That's the flip side of the Washington thing.
Kyle Juszczyk released.
Aaron Banks gone.
Aaron Banks gone. Javon Hargrave gone. Travarius Ward gone. Dre Greenlaw gone. Hufanga gone. Who else am I missing? Leonard Floyd gone.
Gone.
So this offseason is far more about what's gone and rather than what's coming in. And so, as we've said before, there's 2 things at play here. We're setting up for Brock Purdy probably has to get paid unless Mac Jones outplays him. Then he has to get paid. Brock Purdy has to get paid. And look, I think the Niners did do a nice job. I think Ricky Pearsall will be a good fill-in replacement at receiver. I think Renardo Green will be a good fill-in at corner, right, for Ward. He already played well last year. I think they drafted players to replace some of these players. But the previous drafts just did not add enough starters for the Niners to just keep this thing rolling. So it's not there's some vibes to like what Buffalo was last year, where you see a lot of veterans out the door, but these are better veterans out the door than what Buffalo had. And the foundation for Buffalo was stronger because it starts with Josh Allen, who's the MVP. And the foundation for the Niners is Brock Purdy, who I think is very good. But the question was always, well, how is he going to do it when you lose a Debo? When you start to lose some of these pass catchers and you don't have the same type of depth, that's still a question here. So it's not comfortable for the Niners. Last year's draft was huge. This year's draft was massive because I think they need to draft players that are going to contribute right away, especially on the defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I think our conclusion is the offense should still be fine. The skill position players there are still really good. Obviously, Ricky Pearsall is going to need to have a bigger impact in year 2 than year 1. On the other hand, he probably won't get shot again to start year 2, so that's probably going to help him excel relative to last year. The offensive line is still a question mark, like left guard, center. These are not strengths of this group. The other spots, I mean, Trent Williams, still one of the best players in the NFL, but I think he's now reached Tyron Smith, Teron Armstead world of you probably have to budget in a quarter of the season being missed by him at his age. Right guard, good. Dominic Pooney was really good last year, and Colton McKivitz is okay at right tackle, but that group is still a potential issue that you could upgrade upon. The defense is where it's starting to look pretty rough, though. Like you've got Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, both superstars. That's kind of it, though, now. I mean, Renardo Green was good as a rookie, but like we are low on other players that you're comfortable with on that defense.
Yeah, I mean, defensive line. I mean, they're sitting there picking at 11, and I think they could go defensive line. I would love to see the offensive line pick. We talked the other day. I think the offense will be okay. I think they'll be okay. I think they could deal with losing Debo, losing Aaron Banks. They'll be fine. Want to see what happens with this defense. The Niners have been at their best when they are very deep on that D line, and they might bring in what the Rams brought in 4 defensive linemen last year. This could be a 4 defensive lineman draft for the Niners because of what they've lost and what they need next to Nick Bosa there. So more work to do for San Francisco, and they'll probably have 4 comp picks next year. I haven't calculated it, but I'm just assuming with everybody leaving, it's got to be, right? They'll have 4 picks next year, and the volume drafting will now become more prevalent over these next 2 years for the Niners, which coincides with Purdy and the money. Like that, it has to go that way.
Yeah, I mean, their fortunes are tied to the draft. They had a few really fallow years of drafting badly, and then last year they looked like they got the ship back on track. They need another year where they're drafting well, otherwise they will have problems going forward.
All right, we got the Cardinals and Seahawks to discuss. We already touched on the Rams. Let's go Arizona Cardinals here. They bring in Jacoby Brissett's the number 1 here on the list here. Jacoby Brissett comes in as a backup. Josh Sweat is the big one, 4 years, $76 million. And then Dalvin Tomlinson at defensive tackle, 2 years, $29 million. So when we were fixing every team in 5 minutes, they also, by the way, re-signed Baron Browning, 2 years, $15 million off the edge. Fixing every team in 5 minutes, Sam, we said D-line, D-line, D-line. That's 2 pretty significant moves here for the Cardinals, plus bringing back Baron Browning. And all of a sudden, the defensive line depth chart looking much better for Arizona.
Yeah, and factoring in Darius Robinson again, going into year 2, he wasn't much of a factor year 1 because he was injured for most of it. So we said a year ago that group was a lot like being read a preseason defensive front list. Like these are all recognizable names, and if they're part of your rotation as the second team, that's fine. But they were all the first team, so that was a problem. Now you're starting to say, well, each one of them is now relegated down the depth chart a bit because Dalvin Tomlinson should start, Josh Sweat should start, and then Baron Browning, who they brought in last year, didn't make a big impact, but was apparently working through a nagging foot injury for all the season, right? That's the kind of thing that will sap the juice from an edge rusher, from a pass rusher. So, I mean, look, it's him saying that, and he would say that, right? So, like, who knows how accurate it is or not? But if Baron Browning is telling the truth,
which reminds me, do not go to Baseball Reference and look at my ERA from 2008 because I had an elbow injury, right? So I had like a 2.5 ERA in AA. Go to AAA. Don't even look at the numbers there; they don't even exist. I had an elbow injury the whole time, and then I had to go back to AA, and my ERA jumped an extra run when I went back, coming off the injury. So it doesn't count. Just had to get that off my chest. Carry on.
Yeah, well, that was important. But if Baron Browning is telling the truth, and there's more to come from him next year, then Josh Sweat should be a significant upgrade over anybody they've had on the edge for the last few years. And then Dalvin Tomlinson, I think, is a good upgrade on the interior as well. I mean, those are 3 spots that should be in healthier order than they were last season. So I like that. I mean, Jacoby Brissett is an interesting quarterback to add to that group, with given what the roster is otherwise. And then, the other moves have been lower level, just sort of keeping a couple of low level players.
Yeah, I mean, they had to make these moves. I see people saying I'm going to complain about the defensive tackle money for Dalvin. Oh, I got food delivery.
Food delivery service that happens to you every show. This is ridiculous.
Thank you, Benny. You're already wearing your T-ball gear too? That's great. My kids woke up and they threw their baseball uniforms on for T-ball tonight. They're already ready to go. And I have the same egg, sausage, pepper.
You got like your own personal DoorDash / Uber Eats system.
It's very nice.
Unlike the real one, they probably bring the accurate order as opposed to like something vaguely, similar to what you ordered, but missing several key items.
Wife and kids take care of me. And yeah, it's good. I'm not going to eat this on air. Maybe I'll wait. We'll see. We'll see what happens here. Anyway, defensive line for the Cardinals. I like where they're going here. And, exactly what you said, right? They brought back LJ Collier. Great. Rotational player. Don't have to play as many snaps. They lose Roy Lopez, whatever. But like, they had rotational players starting. And as we know, rotational players are worth a lot of money. But bumping those guys down the depth chart helps quite a bit. I think they're still in prime spot to maybe double up on defensive line in the draft and be one of those teams where they could really reshape this. This is Jonathan Gannon in year 3 now, coming from Philly, where that was their MO, right? He's been working with the opposite. Imagine going from Philly, where you are 7 and 8 deep on the defensive line, and then coming to Arizona, where you're like 1 deep with people that can actually threaten the quarterback, and that's the Barbarian. And so Gannon finally is going to have some people that can get after the quarterback, of course, reunited with Josh Sweat. So, yeah, I like these moves for Arizona. I think this was expected. There were certain teams, Arizona, Carolina, they just assumed we're going to spend a ton of money on the defensive line, and that's what we've seen. And it's just the start of getting that defense back on track.
Yeah. I think defense generally is the area they need to target. They're targeting that so far in free agency. We still got the draft to come. Like it's not splashy, but I think it's good, solid moves for Arizona.
Anything else on the Cardinals before we wrap this up with the Seattle Seahawks? Again, if you're a Rams fan, rewind a couple hours. We talked about the Rams. We started with our favorite teams in the NFC, and they were my favorite, what they've done so far this offseason. Let's go Seattle Seahawks. A couple teams. I mean, Seattle, Houston, Minnesota. There's a few teams that just fascinate me this offseason, right? I use that word a lot, but what Seattle's doing, opting out of Geno Smith for a 3rd rounder, going with Sam Darnold as their guy, 3 years, over $100 million. And it's the biggest move, I think, for any team in this offseason, trading Geno Smith and going with Sam Darnold. It was a bit of a surprise. And then you add the DK Metcalf trade. So you trade DK Metcalf, reshaping the wide receiver room, had to release or, move on from Tyler Lockett after 10 years in Seattle. And then, just yesterday they signed DeMarcus Lawrence. I thought Lawrence was going to be, 3 years, $32 million. He was one of those guys who, again, when I'm looking up and down that free agent list, like buy low on DeMarcus Lawrence. I love that move. I really thought it was going to be someone like the Eagles that pulled it off, but I love this move for Seattle. And Josh Jones comes in as a tackle guard, some depth there for Seattle. And then they re-signed a few players, Ernest Jones and Jaron Reed. Ernest Jones at linebacker, Jaron Reed at defensive tackle, making sure that they get that front 7 somewhat intact heading into the draft. So fascinating. Drink every time I say fascinating, but fascinating offseason for the Seahawks.
So we did this with Solid, right? We dug up the thesaurus for alternate words for you. Here's what the initial list is for fascinating synonyms: engrossing, captivating, absorbing, interesting, enchanting, beguiling, bewitching, enthralling, enrapturing, entrancing, spellbinding, or transfixing.
All right, so I already use interesting too much, so that's good that that's there. I use
engrossing would be a good one, I think.
Captivating.
The first two, engrossing and captivating, absorbing maybe. The rest of them go a little bit off the rails, I think.
They do. That's how things go. I'm engrossed and captivated by Seattle's offseason, including 5 picks in the first 3 rounds, in the first 80 or so picks, and what they're going to do there. So it might be a little uncomfortable for Seahawks fans because you're stepping into a bit of an unknown with no DK, and Darnold's more of an unknown than Geno Smith. If anything, Geno was, you knew what you're going to get from him.
Yeah.
Now after 3 years of data. So you're stepping into the unknown, but the unknown could be captivating and exciting if you're a Seahawks fan.
It is a rare case study because it seems to be it's a little bit like the Vikings and Kirk Cousins, where it's like, okay, he's good, not great, Geno Smith, and good, not great should have a cap on it, I think, financially. Like good, not great, you should not pay above a certain amount. Otherwise, you're just immediately working at a disadvantage from teams that are paying a similar amount for their quarterback who is great, right? So you're handicapping yourself if you don't get a discount because the guy is not Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and those kinds of things. So I think that is fine to say, look, Geno is worth this amount of money and we don't want to give him more than that. Let's walk away if he wants more than that. What is unusual about this instance is typically when teams do that, they pivot and go to something dramatically younger, or like they go in a completely different direction, right? Where what the Seahawks have done is they've gone, okay, Geno is worth this amount of money. He wants more than that. Pete Carroll just got hired by the Raiders. It's an automatic flip. Let's just get rid of him. 3rd round picks coming back. All good. But the plan B is to then bring in Sam Darnold for slightly less money. Darnold, who is maybe, I mean, we can argue, is he the same player as an overall level? Is he slightly worse? Is he, whatever. He's in the same general vicinity of Geno Smith in overall terms, and for slightly less money, but still significant money. Like it's not like pivoting to a rookie where suddenly the finances are completely different. So they've elected to get rid of the quarterback because of finances, bring in a similar quarterback on slightly less money. But on top of that, you've also traded away DK Metcalf, again, for justifiable, like financial reasons. Like, hey, we don't think DK is worth $30 million a year. Let's trade him. Let's cash in now. But you've taken Darnold, who I would argue is more vulnerable than Geno Smith to pressure, to environmental, impacts on this roster. You put him on a team that already has a problem on the interior of the offensive line. Like that's the single biggest thing this team needed to address. You've added to those problems by trading away at least the second best receiver you have. You maybe offset some of that because the money's better and because he might be a better fit for this offense with Clint Kubiak coming in. But it's a very unusual strategy that they've employed.
It is. And so when we talk about, hey, if you don't have the elite quarterback, what does it take to win? If you have the quote mid-tier quarterback, there's a couple things at play here. You have to have what, say, the Niners have had the last few years, which is this elite roster around your cheap quarterback or your quarterback generally, or well, that's what you need. So, but that's the other story here is they've achieved the mid-tier quarterback contract, because that's part of the story. Like Geno was sitting there at mid-tier quarterback and he was at mid-tier money. And then he wasn't going to be that guy. So he wanted 40, 45 million, whatever it was. So you opted into what I call the lateral move, Geno to Darnold, right? You could argue that all you want. Let's call it a lateral move or close for cheaper. And they achieved for the second straight QB contract, the middle tier quarterback contract, which outside of the rookie contract quarterback, at least gives you a chance to build. And this is why I say they're enthralling or captivating. 5 picks in the top 92. 10 overall picks for Seattle. They have an offensive line that probably needs two to three starters, all in the interior. And so can you achieve that in the draft? Maybe. But what they do with these picks is going to go a long way to determine Darnold's success. But that's what they've set up, is this opportunity to, what is what the Lions did a couple years ago. The Lions achieved the middle tier quarterback contract, not because Jared Goff wasn't making the money, but because the Rams were picking up a chunk of it on their signing bonus. So they had a couple year window where Goff was just a $30 million quarterback when everyone else was making 40, 50. And they were able to build a team around him for a period of time on the cheap. That's what Seattle's stepping into right now. But again, you got to hit now. Obviously, you're replacing DK. You're replacing Lockett, who's still decent, even though he's a 3. And you have this offensive line to overhaul, and you still could probably use a little bit of help on the defensive line. So they have some holes, but I think they may have worked this quarterback thing the right way as we talk through it.
Yeah, I mean, the other element is Darnold's younger, right?
Yeah.
So he's not only cheaper, but he's younger in addition to that. Like, I get. So the one point I would make is that, like, even if Geno wants $45 million a year, I mean, that is effectively the middle class contract that he signed previously, adjusted for inflation. I mean, now top market money is $60 million a year, right? So it's still like you're still getting him at the middle class discount because he's not, top of the market. So I don't, I understand drawing a line in the sand and saying Darnold for 30 something is better than Geno for 45. I still think Geno for 45 is eminently workable relative to elite for 60, which is the, an alternative out there. So I don't know if that's the reason necessarily to move on from him. I think it's entirely justifiable to, when you take it in the totality, the timing of it was weird to get rid of him and then have to go get Darnold. But if you package it all together and say they moved off Geno, they got a 3rd round pick back, they got cheaper, they got younger, they got arguably a better fit for the current offense that's coming in. All of that I think is fine, but you now need to look at them and say, okay, I need wide receiver 2, and I need at least 2 players to come in on the offensive line. Otherwise, we have problems.
Yeah, and they should still, I think a bunch of teams should still be playing in the guard market. I mean, Tevin Jenkins still hasn't signed, right?
Right.
Since we started recording. Somebody's got to pick up Tevin Jenkins.
Particularly because they're probably not going to draft that guy, at the top of this draft. So if you want to solidify this, you need to do it now.
At least get that spot taken care of. And there might be a good round 1 wide receiver that makes sense for them. I see the chat. I don't know if JSN could be wide receiver 1, and that's fine. I somewhat agree. I mean, I think he might be able to like lead a team in catches or whatever, but I don't know that he's that level of difference maker like some of the best in the league. So if Ted McMillan did fall, I don't expect that, but if he did fall and you paired those two together, that would make a lot of sense to me if you did stumble into that. They have the great Marquez Valdez-Scantling, by the way, who's played with 3 different MVPs, and MVS baby, MVP maker. Wait, was he in Buffalo for a period last year?
Yeah, briefly.
Did I not connect those dots? I know they got rid of him, but he's literally played with the MVP in 4 out of the last 5 seasons, right?
Yeah, he had a run. It was 3 consecutive seasons where he played with the MVP.
I think it went Rodgers, Mahomes, off year, and then last year Allen. Anyway, they're in on Cooper Kupp too. Yeah, they're bringing Cooper Kupp in, and he could be a really nice compliment to JSN. So still work to do.
Yeah,
but I'm intrigued, man. That's it.
I mean, I think they can attack wide receiver with the draft a lot easier than they can offensive line. Like that, they basically still haven't addressed what was their single biggest problem heading into the offseason, and they created 2 additional problems that they needed to solve, one of which they've already ticked off, but wide receiver needs help, and the interior of the offensive line still needs to be overhauled.
Let me read this off to you, by the way, because I did this with Houston. The teams that I am really impressed by in a world where I love having 6 to 8 legitimate options on the defensive line. Houston's intact pretty well. Buffalo's intact pretty well. How about Seattle threatening them? With DeMarcus Lawrence coming in, who I still think is very good. Buy low on Lawrence. DeMarcus Lawrence and Boye Mafe off the edge. Uchenna Nwosu and Derek Hall backing those guys up. Defensive tackle, or the defensive interior 3 in a more of a 3-4 scheme. Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed, last year's first-round pick Byron Murphy as a trio. Could still use some depth there. But that's a nice defensive front there. That's that's 6 or 7 viable players who can get after the quarterback. And in isolation, they're not great, but in totality, what DeMarcus Lawrence, Boye Mafe, Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed, Byron Murphy can do in particular, that's a nice group.
The last season, not even last season. So his stint at the New Orleans Saints was the first time that Marquez Valdes-Scantling was not catching footballs from an MVP.
But he started last year with the Bills, didn't he?
Yes.
Or was that 2 years ago? Okay, so he played with the MVP. He played with Josh Allen last year.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So the Saints was the first quarterback to not have an MVP throwing him the football.
Well, no, 23 he was with the Chiefs, and that was Lamar, MVP.
But the point is, Patrick Mahomes is an MVP. Aaron Rodgers is an MVP. Gotcha. Josh Allen is an MVP. The Saints were the first team where their quarterback was not an MVP.
But I'm saying, like, in the year that he plays with them, he is the legitimate MVP maker. As soon as he signed with Buffalo,
for 3 straight years, I think he was the MVP maker.
As soon as he signed with Buffalo, I said, Josh Allen MVP, of course. You know that's going to happen. And even though they got rid of him, that's what happened. If you're a Rams fan, we already talked about you 2 hours ago. The hardest working NFL podcast featuring a former minor league pitcher and an Irishman. It's us. 32 teams in 2 days. Did we forget anyone? Did we talk about the Titans? I think we did. Never want to forget the Titans. Broke down every team here in 2 days. If you haven't seen the AFC show, go check it out. Yesterday, appreciate people telling everyone else to hit the thumbs up. Be sure to do that and hit the subscribe button. We're just less than 100 away from 35,000 subscribers on the channel.
Very close.
Very, very close. Yeah, man. Anything else before we wrap it up?
No, we're at it so soon.
So soon. So quick. Regularly scheduled shows next week. Monday, 9 a.m. live Eastern time. YouTube, 10:30 a.m. live Wednesday and Thursday. We'll do mock draft Monday. We'll do a little post-free agency mock draft on Monday. And then we're fully into draft season once again. We'll have position rankings. We'll have mock drafts. We'll have guests. It's draft season, 7 weeks or so away from the draft. All right. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again on Monday with more. Check the mic.